Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is our Wednesday, May 8th regular Board of County Commissioners meeting, and we have a room full of guests here today from Kids First and all the child care centers. So thank you all for being here, and we have a proclamation to read on your behalf. This is a proclamation from Pickens County, Colorado, whereas Kids First Child Care Resource Center, the Roaring Fork Association for the Education of Young Children, Pickens County Child Care Providers, and the Rural Resort Region Early Childhood Council are celebrating the month of the young child in May. And whereas by calling attention to the need for high-quality early childhood programs available for all families in our community, and counties that champion high-quality child care reap immediate and long-term rewards for their community and economic vitality, civic participation, school success, and public safety. And whereas, given the appropriate learning opportunities that high-quality early childhood programs provide, children acquire the early language, mathematical, social, emotional, artistic, and physical skills and abilities that strengthen the foundation and embraced by the Aspen idea, mind, body, and spirit. Now therefore be it proclaimed that the Board of County Commissioners and the citizens of Pickens County join the National Association for the Education of Young Children in proclaiming May 2013 as a month of the young child. And we have a room full of young children here.
Yay!
We extend our heartfelt thanks and appreciation to all those who have worked so hard to care for our youngest citizens, and we commend these efforts and encourage community involvement for all citizens to recognize and support the needs of young children. Congratulations, Shirley. You want to come up and say a few words?
I would love to. Do you guys want to tell them first what school do you go to?
Yeah.
Where do you go?
ELC.
The Early Learning Center.
And where is that? Where?
Yellow brick.
The Yellow Brick.
Our school is really far.
Really far walk.
Walk all the way here.
Surely.
In the rain with puddles. With an umbrella, with a pink umbrella.
Please don't learn.
Surely. We get the kids to stand up with us.
Because we can't see them on the
By all means.
camera.
You guys, come here, stand by me, okay? And face that way. Now you're on TV. Why don't you stand up?
Actually, we have lots of goodies to hand out.
Well, and we brought the flyer. Come over here. Look, if you come, you can't see yourself, but you will be able to later on. You'll bet here. See the cameras on that back wall. Can you wave at the camera? Everybody wave. Yay! Yeah. We have a parade next week on Thursday, 10 o'clock. We've done this parade for 23 years. And we're going to do it again, rain or shine, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ready?
So we invite everybody to come out and join us. Oh, can you guys catch?
Ready?
No one's losing free in the crowd there, is there?
Keep going, Shirley. I didn't want to interrupt you, but...
You're fine.
There's one on the floor.
If you go up closer, he doesn't have to throw so far.
How old is everybody? Hold up how many fingers you are. 5, 3, 4.
5 and a half.
You're 3. 5 and a half.
I'm 5 and a half.
You're 4. 5 and a half for you. 4. 4. You're 4.
Give that to the next. Give that to the
Someone
next.
in this class
Here,
are
get a
Shirley does. Have to share that. Who needs one?
There's one. You need one back here. You need one.
Let's, if you're going to eat them, just drop them on the floor.
Talk to your teachers. You guys need one. Talk like a man without children. More. All right, everybody got one there?
Everyone got one?
Stop with the baggies, huh?
I didn't get one.
You got
I didn't get one yet. I didn't get one.
That'd be pretty cool. We'll take it back to school with us, okay? All right.
So Shirley, you're telling us about the
Well, about the parade mostly, that's next Thursday at 10 o'clock. And we would love to have you come join us, march in the parade. Bring a kid, cheer the kids on, whatever you want to do. It's a lot of fun.
So you meet in front of Boogie's?
Meet in front of Boogie's, 10 o'clock, wind through the downtown and end up by the fountain.
It's okay, we can hold this.
Hope to see you all there. Let's not do any more of that.
That's okay.
Wait till we go outside, feed the
Yeah.
birds.
All right, are we ready to go back and find our teachers?
Yeah.
Yay, somebody's coat.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Oh, and we got some way out. Everybody gets to go back to school, okay? Oh, that one goes
Somebody can fly away if they don't have those back at school.
We're gonna hand them out at school, okay? Well, you can give your GoPro to me.
Thank you for having us.
You want one to take back with you?
And I'll eat them. Hold them while you get
Take the extras? Well, I don't need them.
Plus, you can get
Get
it
rid of
back.
kids to get upset and get on the trip.
Or you can just
Sure. All right. No, Coat's got to go on. We're going to go back outside. Okay, we'll do it out there.
My sleeves are inside out.
It's okay.
They did pretty good at that.
That's much better,
Next time
right?
we'll bring the babies. All right. Thanks for coming, guys.
Yep.
Uh-oh, we already got it. Uh-oh.
It's okay.
Exactly, kids are always,
It's pretty clean, actually.
they're always good.
Okay, would the next group like to come forward and sit down? No takers on that one.
Okay.
Okay. That was a well-behaved group of young kids. John, any additions or deletions to today's agenda?
Yes, George, we have two items that we'd like to remove from the agenda today. The first item is under consent actions, first reading, item number 3, which is an ordinance amending the Aspen-Pitkin County Affordable Housing Guidelines, Part 7, Section 12, and establishing a new methodology for calculation of affordable housing impact fees. Based on the number of questions and such we're getting before this meeting on that, we decided it'd be better to step back and workshop that item one more time before we brought it forward in a regular meeting. The second item is under consent action item second reading. It's item number 12, which is a resolution authorizing the Pitkin County Clerk and Recorder to conduct the November 5th, 2013 election by mail ballot in accordance with CRS 17.5101. We'd like to pull that item because of the passage of House Bill 1303, which actually mandates mail ballot elections. There's a lot of dovetailing that would happen between our proposed resolution and that new piece of legislation, but there are two areas of conflict that need to be resolved around the early voting and the vote center requirements that are in the new legislation, and so we don't think it's appropriate to pass that at this time. It is a public hearing, so anyone that is here, you still need to take comments on it, I believe. Is that correct?
No, you just withdraw.
Just withdraw it? So, okay, so we're recommending withdrawing that item.
Okay, any questions from the board on any of those?
And then one more, it's not an addition or deletion, but just a note that on item number 9 under consent actions first reading, Commissioner Child will be recusing himself from that item, so we'll need a little bit of time for him both before and after that item to leave the room and come back.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, with that, we're at our part of the agenda where anyone who's wishing to make a public comment that is not on today's agenda is welcome to do that. Seeing none, we'll close that public comment and bring it back for board comments. Rachel?
Sure. Well, waking up on this wonderful May morning, the 8th, we find that we have two newly elected Aspen City Council members, Art Daly and Ann Mullins, and I'd like to wish them both congratulations on campaigning hard and their willingness to serve the community. We also have two candidates moving forward to a mayoral election for City of Aspen voters. And I also would like to thank all the candidates who ran who will not be moving forward to that runoff. Again, it always helps shape the dialogue and shape the community when people are willing to get out there and debate and go to forums and things like that. And their concern for the community is deeply appreciated. So we will, as a city voter myself, be deciding between Steve Skadron and Tory come June. And what I'd like to really just kind of remind people is that if you're leaving town, you need to go by the city clerk's office on the second floor of City Hall to request that an absentee ballot be sent to you. And it's going to be very important. There's traditionally a pretty heavy drop-off of people participating in elections during runoffs, and that's always a little bit of a sad thing. And we've seen runoffs in the mayoral races decided by less than 50 votes. So I think it's very important that everyone make sure, if they're not going to be in town, if they're taking that late May, Memorial Day, extended vacation or something, that you vote before you leave town, or that you request the absentee ballot be mailed to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? I just want to echo Rachel's congratulations to Art and to Ann. We look forward to working with them. We work closely on many different issues with City Council and look forward to seeing who the new mayor will be. I also want to compliment all the candidates for what I found and thought was a very well-run, professional, respectful campaign. Each were able to provide their own personal, professional views. There was no negative campaigning, which is a real pleasure and relief from more of our national campaign. So thank you all, and thank you all for putting yourselves out there. What was a very intense campaign period. Okay, we're going to move on to our consent action item. That is, the first is the minutes, approval of the minutes of April 16th, April 23rd work session, and the regular meeting of April 24th.
I'd make a motion for the approval of those minutes.
Second?
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
George, I'm not voting on this. 'Cause I wasn't-
Oh, I'm sorry, and Mike abstained on all those because you were out of town. Okay, thank you. Okay, next are consent action items. These are all first readings and set for public hearing on May 22nd. I noted that many of these we did not really work session on, so I'm going to ask that we actually pull each of these and have a short presentation by staff on all these, not only for us but for the public. So I'll just read these one at a time. We'll just take them one at a time then. The first is an ordinance amending ordinance number 011-2012 lease agreements with the community nonprofit lessees and authorizing the chairman to execute lease agreements for space located at the Michael W. Schultz Health and Human Services Building, and Jody Smith will present that. And again, if we could just have the staff give us a quick, brief overview on these, and then if there are any questions for the board, we can follow up.
Hi, Jody Smith. I'm the facilities manager, and just a brief history is that in 1991, Pickens County entered a lease agreement with Aspen Valley Hospital to, they were the owners of that property, and we built the building, and we now operate and manage that building. And in 2012, we've had leases all along, but in 2012, we came before the board and we had, we requested an ordinance to be able to have a 5-year lease with these agencies, the nonprofit agencies within that building, so that we didn't have to keep coming back every year and re-entering leases and having ordinances. So those were approved in 2012. There were 9 leases. Since that time, in January, we had some agencies vacate the space. That was the Aspen Valley Hospital. They had their IT department in one of the buildings. They were paying rent. They vacated that space. And also the Right Door closed their doors. And so we had an opportunity to move some spaces around, reallocate to the different nonprofits. And so we're asking to amend those ordinances. There are 5 of them: the Aspen Counseling Center, Response, Community Health, Youth Zone, and the Aspen Medical Foundation. We're all moved around and reconfigured. As you all know, we brought the Detox Center into the Health and Human Services building. That is now part of the Aspen Counseling lease, so that's why they have an increase. And there were some other opportunities. We did some swapping, and it's been a really great opportunity and more workable space for those agencies. The changes within the leases themselves are pretty minor. We changed them from a 5-year term to a 4-year just so that we could stay on track with that they all expire at the same time is one of the changes. The second change is the square foot allocation. We wanted to make sure that was reflected properly. We adjusted the allocation amount, the dollar amount within those leases based on a dollar amount for the in-kind space that the county commissioners are giving to those agencies. And then we also added a map so that we could actually see where they're at in the building as part of that lease. So those are the changes that happened, and just what we've got going on. Any questions?
Thanks, Jody. Any questions for Jody? No?
I would make a motion to approve the ordinance amending ordinance number 011-2012, lease agreements with community nonprofit lessees, and authorizing the chairman to execute lease agreements for space located at the Michael W. Schultz Health and Human Service Building.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Thanks, Jody.
Thank you.
Okay. Next is an ordinance adopting the amendment to the Aspen-Pickton County Affordable Housing Guidelines. And Tom McCabe is here to present that.
Hi, I'm Tom McCabe, Executive Director of the Housing Authority. This ordinance is a reflection of some discussions that started back in 2007. I was asked to bring forward a variety of ideas that could be considered implementing in affordable housing programs, and as initially presented, we called it the Caribbean rotation. And we were trying to make light of it at that point in time. We were, and perhaps because of that, it didn't catch on, and and it was misunderstood, I think, a bit. But as time has gone on, and it's become apparent that the number of people that could retire in affordable housing and stay in that affordable housing while not being part of the workforce was increasing. This started to come back to everybody's, up on everybody's radar screens as an item that we could implement, and it might have a positive effect on that. The idea here being that as the program exists now, a person who's in housing can retire in that housing and live in that housing until they decide to vacate it or until they die. And so we are expecting, with the baby boom moving through our population, we're expecting that a significant number of units will be occupied by retired workforce. Inasmuch as that happens, we won't be able to house new and active workforce. The way our program is structured also is that people in affordable housing, retired or not, have to live in that property for 9 months of the year. This ordinance would modify a portion of the guidelines that says a person who is retired could rent their home up to 6 months of the year, enabling them to go off and do other things, like avoid the winter or explore other places that they might choose to retire in and take care of family and other issues. And while they were gone, we would have qualified workers renting that unit. And in that case, perhaps mitigate to some degree non-use of that inventory by workers. So if we have, it's almost, we expect it to be more of a seasonal issue than anything else. We would expect that most people that would avail themselves of this opportunity would choose to leave in the wintertime and go to warmer climes, and then we could get workforce in it. So it's kind of a de facto seasonal housing rental program, where seasonal housing rental programs are our biggest challenge to provide as a community. And the nice thing about the program is that it costs essentially nothing, and if we experiment with it and decide that it is more trouble than it's worth, we could rescind it very easily. But the staff doesn't really expect that to happen. We expect it to be, over time, we expect it to become more and more popular, and it might contribute significantly to the seasonal housing, the satisfaction of seasonal housing. So it is, from our point of view, real easy to do. Very little or no cost to the community. There'll be some additional administrative costs, and things that have come up in the discussion items that were concerns of either the City Council or BOCC related primarily to issues that would be negotiated as part of the lease. So between the owner and the tenant, which APSHA doesn't really think it has much of a place, in that negotiation. It's a contract between two parties. We could coach people on what might be reasonable things to include in their lease. We would oversee the terms of the lease with regard to the lease duration and the rent charged, and certainly make sure that everybody that rents is qualified. And so it seems to staff to be a reasonable thing to attempt to do. We would, to the extent that people take advantage of it, we would monitor it, and we intend to do surveys after the fact to see what we can learn for each year on those that have gone through the process. I think the memo has probably outlined most of the issues, and you're already familiar with them, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Tom. Questions for Tom? Well,
One of the things when we discussed this, I asked for some guidelines in assisting people to do this, and one of the things I requested was, this draft lease that you have in here, which I think is great. Are you recommending that this is the lease that they use, or is this just an outline of a potential lease that the two parties entering into this lease agreement can use?
We wanted to give an example of the range that would be available to the tenant and the owner. And the lease that was provided is a modification of one of our standard leases, and attached to the back of that are some of the house rules that we usually incorporate. And so that would be an example of a very thorough lease. And we would certainly present that to anybody that wanted to use it for guidance in writing their own lease, or they could adopt it for that matter. And then behind that, we offered a simple office supply store lease that covers the very basics. Realistically, we think this is a bargain between the two parties, the owner and the tenant, and although we would certainly advise them to do it carefully so that everybody's happy at the end of the lease, we don't really know that we have a place in that process with regard to what's required, what's not required.
Rachel?
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Tom. The question I have is that currently, if you became an empty nester and have an extra bedroom, you could lease to a qualified tenant just the room and still live in the residence year-round. And there is a minimum lease requirement. Is it 2 months or 6 months that you offer that tenant for that room?
You know, the way it's structured now, it's a 6-month would be our normal minimum that we would prefer. And what happens, I think, more often than not, are those rentals occur without our knowledge. But if there are issues that come down, then the person can't really come to us and make any complaints about it, because the thing that they should do is, if they want to lease, let's say I wanted to lease a room in my place, I would go to the housing authority, I would outline that I would meet their minimum term requirements, and they would review the amount of rent that I would charge, and they would qualify that person as a worker. If those fundamentals are satisfied, we're really happy to have people rent out their rooms. Again, we get more utility out of our inventory.
Okay, and I seem to recall it used to be a minimum of 6-month lease used to be offered, and some could be shorter if it was a summer music student or something like that. But what I'm wondering is, does someone have to, under this ordinance, have to rent for 6 months?
No.
Or is there a minimum? It has to be more than 3 weeks? You know, where do we draw the line so it's not kind of a vacation rental as opposed to a qualified worker rental?
We wanted it to fall into the ballpark between 3 and 6 months, but it might work out that an owner's need would be more on a line with a 4 or 5 month. We didn't have any issue with that, as long as they could find somebody willing to, to rent the place for that period of time. Anything less than that, and we start worrying about vacation rentals. But realistically, most vacation rentals are usually 3 weeks or thereabouts. And we're sure that happens from time to time. We have another program that we're thinking about implementing to try to get on top of that a little bit, but it's difficult for us to police that one.
Yeah. So, I guess, do you feel there should be a minimum amount of time in this ordinance that, that a lease has to be offered for at least 2 months to someone, or just leave it open-ended?
We didn't really spend much time worrying about the minimums, and I think we had it all in our mind. It would be between 3 and 6. But having said that, I'm not so sure that it's that important. It's a substantial amount of effort for someone to go through to line this up, so we wouldn't anticipate it being abused on the short end.
Okay. Well, and we are going to be reviewing it in a year to see if things crop up, and if that's an addition we'd like to make a year from now. I'd just like you to track that issue particularly and see if we should have a minimum.
Okay.
Thank you.
Tom, we did discuss this at our joint meeting with the city council a while back, and I think everyone was excited about this opportunity. My question is, has city council approved this yet, or how's the timing work, and then how will you be communicating to all the deed restricted owners about this opportunity?
We haven't yet carried it to city council since our joint meeting. We're scheduling to do that as well, and so that'll be before them soon. Once both bodies are in agreement on this, should you opt to change something, or should the council opt to change something, obviously there'd be another round until we reach some agreement. But once it got approved, then we would do press releases, and we would make the changes. We would do press releases to make sure that it was well broadcast in the community. Would love to have people take advantage of it for this upcoming season, if that's at all possible.
Okay. Any other questions? Steve?
I move that we approve the ordinance adopting amendment to the Aspen-Pitkin County Affordable Housing Guidelines.
Second.
Second, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, next is a resolution approving a memorandum of understanding between Pitkin County and U.S. Department of Agriculture and Forest Service, White River National Forest Service for cooperative frequency use. Bruce Romero is here to present that.
Hi, Bruce Romero, Emergency Dispatch Director. So this memorandum of understanding is simply to allow the Forest Service and their firefighting hands to use the frequencies that are licensed by Pitkin County, and in turn allows Pitkin County personnel and firefighters to use the resources, the radio resources that the Forest Service has in the county. It does not change our normal day-to-day operations. It only allows us during an incident that may require cooperative use with the Forest Service that we would have the additional frequencies that the Forest Service has licensed, and they would have the additional frequencies that Pitkin County has licensed.
So in case of an emergency, if you've got both agencies being able to utilize the same frequencies, how do you prevent one from stepping on the other?
So both department, all the Pitkin County agencies as well as the Forest Service utilize the Incident Command System, which prioritizes and places different functions on different frequencies. So a command channel will be assigned, and the Forest Service involvement in the situation, they would know that this particular frequency is for command traffic, this other one may be for fire tactical operations. So because we operate in the same ways, they have the same understanding that we do in how to use these channels.
Okay. Steve?
Does the Forest Service have the proper radios for using this right now, or are they going to have to buy new equipment to make this work for them?
They currently have the correct type of equipment, the correct band to use our frequencies. It's actually the same band that the Forest Service uses.
Okay. I was concerned with their budget cuts. If they had to buy new equipment, it might make it difficult for them.
Exactly,
But
yeah.
They already have the equipment.
They had the equipment, and this MOU came to me as a request from the Forest Service to make this cooperative agreement.
Okay, any other questions?
I'll make a motion. Approve the resolution of the Board of County Commissioners of Pitkin County, Colorado, approving the memorandum of understanding between Pitkin County and the USDA Forest Service, White River National Forest Service for cooperative frequency use.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have an ordinance authorizing the execution of 2 amendments to agreements for on-airport rental car operators. Brian Griffey is here from the airport.
Hello. This is an amendment to 2 existing agreements that we have, 2 of our 4 rental car operators. As part of a recent survey we did airport-wide, we discovered that we have been charging incorrectly the square footage has been incorrect as part of the exhibit, so our charges have been incorrect. This really corrects those charges, and over the course of 2 months sets it to what the accurate number should be, and able to move forward with the correct charges.
Okay. Rachel?
So I imagine that the survey work has been done in relationship to the airport master planning and the ongoing pedestrian tunnel and those sort of improvements? Mm-hmm. Is that where the error was noted?
Correct. Yeah, and the good news is here we were able to validate the other 2 rental car companies that don't need to be amended and know that those numbers are good.
Good. Well, I would just comment that, if we were in error, we'd correct the error and go forward, so I'll be supporting this.
Steve?
On the first page of the amendment, it refers to $2.50 for storage lot space instead of per square foot. and maybe you did that intentionally, but it sounds funny to me. Like, I think it would sound better to say per square foot.
Yep, it's per square foot per year. Can certainly
And
note
it
that
says
on that.
per storage lot space, as if that's for one whole parking space for a car or something like that.
Yep, happy to make that amendment for second read.
Okay. Would we need to amend the amendment to reflect that?
No, when it comes back to us for second reading, we'll just note that, and that will be noted, and maybe you can just highlight that so we can see that in the packet.
And you see where that is on the recitals? And it would be on, I think it's on both of the agreements with the two different companies. Says the same thing.
It's in the third recital on
The third whereas in the recitals.
I'm looking at the ordinance. Okay. Yep, I see it. I'll make that change.
Okay, so we have a motion, we do have a motion as amended.
We have a motion?
No, when we have a motion.
Yeah. I will make a motion to approve the ordinance authorizing execution of 2 amendments to agreements for on-airport rental car operators as amended.
Second.
Second, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great, thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Good catch, Steve.
Next is a resolution providing supplemental appropriations to the 2012 budget, the year end. John Redmond is here to present that.
John Redmond, Finance Director. We have a 2012 budget supplemental which covers 3 things: the ambulance district, a translator budget transfer, and a capital fund transfer also. The biggest item here is related to the ambulance district. The ambulance district operates really under 2 entities, Pickens County and Aspen Valley Hospital. As far as the Pickens County side, we collect property tax of roughly $300,000 a year, which is dispersed to Aspen Valley Hospital at about $25,000 a month. And what Aspen Valley Hospital does is they're actually the operator of the ambulance. They run the payrolls, they pay the expenditures. In addition, they have what's called patient revenue. So if you're fortunate or unfortunate enough to have to use the ambulance, your fees for those services eventually wind up at the hospital. Those run around $900,000 a year. What's happened here is that there's been a revenue shortfall of approximately $50,000 from budget on that patient revenue side. In addition, there's probably another $15,000 that the operating budget went over budget, which is, so total, their net budget fell short about $65,000 this year. And what we're looking for today is $46,000 to cover those shortfalls. Yes.
Rachel?
And that will come from the reserve fund of the ambulance mill levy? Because
That's
that was
correct.
not detailed in the memo very
That's correct.
clearly. But it's not from the general fund, it's not...
No.
Because it just says Pickens County share of cost was increased, but it's the ambulance fund share
That's correct.
was increased. Thank you.
That's correct.
Does this mean that there were fewer ambulance calls this year, so there was less revenue collected?
I can only say that there were fewer calls than they had expected. I think the trend has been going downward in the last couple of years, but I can't say that it was...
So that might be, I mean, that would be a good thing if
Yes.
fewer people
yes.
got hurt
That's
and
correct.
they didn't make as much money as
That's correct.
anticipated. It also could mean they're having trouble collecting the money that's owed them or some other thing.
Well, they do have an allowance for bad debt, which actually That was part of their savings because their revenue was down. But net, the revenue on the patient side was down around $50,000. Any other questions?
Any other questions on that? Rachel?
No real questions. Just a comment that, working with the ambulance district, they did reduce their services last year to try to respond to the falling caseload in terms of how many ambulances they had at the ready for, at ski season particularly, it seems to me. And so, I think that they've done a good job of trying to match projections to actuals. And I appreciate what you say is going to be a procedure going forward of kind of a quarterly update from the hospital about where revenues seem to be. And I just wanted to kind of note for the public, and maybe John can help me, but I think it's been 30 years or some odd since there's been any sort of increase in the taxpayer support for the ambulance district. So I think it's run very tightly and very efficiently, and we're not sure how long that record will hold with inflation and demand, but again, I think they've done a good job and appreciate the new procedure being put in place.
Yes, I think it was 82 was the year.
Okay, and then the other two items, as you say, it's a net zero.
Net zero, they're in essence taking budgets and shifting them from project to project. So there's no new appropriation, it's just a shifting.
Okay, any other further questions? Steve?
I move we approve a resolution of the Board of County Commissioners of Pitkin County, Colorado, providing supplemental appropriations to the 2012 budget year end.
Second, any further discussion? See none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Okay, next is an ordinance accepting a trail easement from Dan Bunta and Mary Manning. Dale Will's going to present this.
If I can get my map up on the wall here. Try to talk while I'm operating the computer, maybe dangerous, but this is a trail easement that was dedicated as a result of a land use application granting a site plan review for a parcel up in Little Annie Basin. And John, why am I not seeing where to get to my flash drive?
Yeah, why didn't you talk about that?
Thank you. It's really the latest step in a sort of a long-range goal that Open Space and Trails has had to link up a trail through the Little Annie Basin over to the Sterling Cooper Open Space that we bought a couple years ago. And as you might recall, shortly after we purchased that property, Hawk Greenway donated a trail easement on a piece of land that he owned for a little while, and that created another link in this route. There is some sort of an old mining pathway through there. It's been asserted it was built by the CCC, although I'm not sure. But in any event, Dan Bunta and Mary Manning were agreeable to granting some additional links that will ultimately allow us to get from Little Annie Road over to the Sterling Cooper Open Space. And the two features that are in this grant are depicted on this map here. There's two pieces to it. This is Hurricane Road, and this is public land over here. This is a public road system out to here, so by granting this existing road with a public easement, we'll be able to cross that. And secondly, You can just see faintly on my map here, the Greenway Trail gift runs up through this parcel. What the Bunta Trail does for us here is it connects on an old driveway on a direct route over to Little Annie Road and will eliminate a much steeper climb from the current portal onto this trail easement, which is much further downhill. So I think it's a fairly straightforward grant. We like working with community development to get these trails hooked up through combinations of purchases and land use dedications, and I'd recommend that you approve this.
So, Dale, is this a hiking trail, a biking trail, equestrian trail? Is it multi-use or?
I would describe it as a hiking trail, a single track at this point, because this climb up the hill is pretty steep. There is no prohibition on other uses on it, and once we have more of the linkages done, I would expect us to be undertaking a management review and doing more promotion, and then we'll go back to that question at that time.
Okay. Steve?
They're listed as roads and driveways. Are they used for the purpose of getting into other people's property or to their houses?
Yes. There are no new trail construction items in this project. The lower piece is an existing driveway. It's not often used, but it's visible and walkable on the ground. I am not sure how much use the current owner is giving that linkage here. Hurricane Road is used for anyone that accesses their property back off of Upper Hurricane Road. So what these do for us is they give us the right to allow the public to walk on these existing structures that are on the ground.
Any other questions for Dale? Motion?
I would make a motion to approve an ordinance accepting the Bunta Manning Little Annie's public trail easement.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Just like to say thank you to Dan and Mary, because they were very forthcoming with saying, absolutely, we'll allow you to have these trails, and I think they're good stewards of their property up there. So.
Okay. With that, all in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, thanks, Dale, and you're not going very far, I don't think. Okay, next is an ordinance authorizing an amendment to the 2003 option contract for the purchase of a conservation easement for Capitol Creek Ranch. And I know you're going to recuse yourself. I think Dale's just going to give some historical information that I think you probably are able to sit in on if you're interested. No?
I think.
I would suggest.
Watching it from TV would be better.
I recuse myself from this in the future weeks, anything to do with Capitol Creek Ranch, because I am part owner of that. So call me on my phone when you're done. I'll be upstairs.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, George, and I'm happy to be joined by Tim McFlynn, trustee on the Open Space and Trails Board. This contract is one of the more significant that the Open Space program has entered into over its lifetime, and if it's okay, I wouldn't mind just saying a little bit about why that's so. Prior to the county signing this contract with Bob Child in 2002, all the open space projects were essentially done in isolation from the community development process, and that gave rise to mischief that's ongoing, where we had conservation easements that the Open Space Board would acquire that were never, the building sites had not been reviewed by community development, and then people come back later and there'd be arguments.
I had been on the job for just a couple of years, and the open space board that hired me said one of your mandates is to try to conserve as much of the 10,000 plus acres of unspoiled land in Capitol and Snowmass Creeks as you possibly can. And I was fortunate in arriving at that time in that Cindy Hubin and John Ely were both looking forward to more increased collaboration with the Open Space Department, and we put together this deal with the Childs. Jeannie is here, and so welcome, Jeannie. And it was really extraordinary to put this together back at the time. It was the sort of the last step that Bob Child took in his long campaign to see that valley not become another ski area, and the deal that we put together was unique, as I mentioned, in that the county approved the land use elements through its regulatory process at the same time that the Open Space Board put together these contracts. Now the whole thing would be over and done with, except that we set up half of this conveyance on a long fuse, which is now gotten rather short 10 years later. But real quickly, let me get a full screen of the property on that. The Child's Ranch is some 1,500 acres that borders public lands on the Maroon Bell Snowmass Wilderness, and Haystack Mountain sits about here. Capitol Creek Road comes up past the monastery and comes up around here. In 2002, we purchased a conservation easement on the southern 750 odd acres, and that's been part of our inventory ever since. At the same time, the county granted land use approvals for the reserved rights in the northern part of the ranch, and we entered into an option contract to purchase our conservation easement here. The reason for the delay was that the tax structure of the family corporation wasn't optimal for receiving the consideration on the easement, and it takes 10 years to switch that over. So we entered into a contract that said, under no event shall this closing occur later than June 15th of 2013. At the time I thought, well, we can forget all about that, but here we are, and we're now trying to dust this off and get it ready for closing. Now, in the intervening period, everyone's had a chance to take a second look at some of the conservation easement provisions, and the Childs have worked with the open space staff and board to propose some changes. Normally you wouldn't see our revisions in conservation easements prior to a deal like this, but in this case the conservation easement draft had been an exhibit to the contract that was executed by the commissioners in 2002, and consequently anything that we change in it now has to come back for this kind of formal review. But I believe that the changes that we propose in the conservation easement are pretty straightforward, and they are also consistent with the practice that evolved after this deal got done. It was a seminal deal that paved the way to the ranch conservation projects that I worked on with John and Cindy on the Harvey Ranch, the Grange Ranch, the former Fender Ranch, Bill Thales Ranch, and maybe a few others I can't remember, but this set the template for that. Maybe before I go into the details of some of these little modifications, I will turn this over to Tim, who's been working on Capitol Creek conservation a lot longer than I have. So.
Thanks, thanks, Dale. I'm Tim McFlynn, and I'm really here on behalf of the Open Space Program, 23 years old and counting, as well as the current board, and obviously to support the staff recommendation and the Open Space Board recommendation, urging you to support that for two reasons. First, it makes it a better conservation easement there's one less cabin, the county recoups $150,000 as the option payment, and it's a far better easement for purposes of managing this as a ranch. That's the main reason the county invested in it in 2002, was to preserve agriculture and rural character in the Snowmass Capitol Creek area. The second reason, every so often, I think it's really appropriate to pause and honor a conservation leader. And I want to just say that, as Dale mentioned, but going way back, really before the Haystack Ski Area and all the way up until this transaction, Bob Child was really a legend as a rancher and an engineer and a public official. And as one of the co-founders of the Open Space Program, I want to simply say that he was the key ally and advisor to those of us citizens who came to your board in 1989 and said, let's have an open space program, let's have a public funding mechanism. And the reason was he had already been meeting with large landowners, and I happen to know that because I was invited to the meetings in Woody Creek, in the Crystal, in Old Snowmass, in Emma, talking about the big working ranches being conserved before it was too late. And so he and Reese Henry, he a rancher and Reese Henry, an Aspen business leader, agreed to co-chair the Save Open Space Citizens Committee that took the ballot measure that your board put on the ballot and got it passed by the citizens. And that's the story that I just wanted to add to the specific approval that you're being asked to make today. And I mean, he even created the Snowmass Capitol Creek Caucus before there were very many caucuses, and that was to protect the creek. His idea was we need to have a citizen group in that neighborhood to protect the creek. So he led by example. This wonderful Aspen Times from September 1, 2002, called Forever Open, cover story, picture of one of the family members on the Child Ranch. And I'll just read the summary of the story on page 3 with another great photo of their home. Alan Harvey wrote the long story with beautiful pictures, but this is over 10 years ago. Bob Child made his mark in the valley as a Pitkin County Commissioner, fighting to control runaway development in the 1970s and 80s. Now living in California, Child is trying to push through one more project to save some very special land, the ranch he bought in the early 60s. Child and his children have a plan that will slash potential development on their 1,500 acres, put a conservation easement on most of the ranch, and leave millions of dollars on the ground, close quote. So, thanks. That's why I'm here.
Yeah, thanks for that bit of history.
Yeah, it's good. Every now and then.
It's quite a sermon. So to go from the sublime back to the mundane, the staff memo outlines the changes to the conservation easement that we proposed. Again, I believe they're all consistent with our current practice, and also at our next meeting I'll be joined by Suzanne Wolf in that these changes will also dovetail with some modifications to the land use approvals that were done back in 2002, and consequently the changes are being reviewed not only by the Open Space Board, but they also are going to have to go through the filter of the Community Development Department, and you'll get that full briefing at the next meeting when we're here together. The reason that we're not here together today is because the land use changes only needed one meeting, and so I had to start this off. In addition to the changes to the conservation easement, one rather minor provision is we'd like the ability to close a little later than June 15th if needed to get survey work and that sort of thing done. And lastly, and this I think is probably the most significant discussion point, is that the original contracts discussed what to do with the TDRs on this half of the ranch. It was rezoned rural and remote, and Cindy was a promoter of that at the time as a way of creating the development sites on this part of the ranch that are part of this whole kind of conservation program. And the first conservation easement, as Tim mentioned, reserved the right to build a cabin in the rural and remote zone. It was anticipated that would be something like a family retreat, and the conservation easement provides that if it's not built by the child family, that it does not transfer to any other owner of the ranch. As you may know, the ranch is now on the market, or at least most of it, except for Steve's parcel. And that raises the question of, well, what becomes of this cabin site? The way the contracts all are set up, they are silent on whether the voluntary extinguishment of that cabin site prior to sale would yield an additional TDR. That would normally be the effect of the zoning that's in place there now. And so therefore, the third piece of the changes that we're recommending to the option agreement is to make it explicit that if they do voluntarily extinguish that cabin site through an amendment to the south conservation easement, that they'll be able to retain that additional TDR. With this whole package, I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, both the staff and the board recommend that you approve these.
Thanks, Dale. Questions?
It was a very thorough memo. They explained the changes very well. Would you accept a motion, George?
Yeah.
I would move to approve the ordinance authorizing an amendment to the 2003 option contract for the purchase of a conservation easement from Capitol Creek Ranch.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Good, thanks, Tim, for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dale. We'll just wait a minute for Commissioner Childs to come back down. John, want to
Yeah, slip out real quick. So
do you want to sit down real quick, too? Stand
won't
real
go
quick.
anywhere, but it's-
Grassroots, we're losing people. Grassroots, let's take a 5-minute break. Okay, we're on to our consent public hearing. This is our second reading. The first is an ordinance approving a contract for a site lease for ITT Excelius at the Aspen-Picken County Airport. And Brian is here again from the airport.
Brian and I have Dustin as well.
Hi.
Hello again. So this really is a wonderful story, really. ITT Excellus came to Dustin in the fall, winter, said we'd like to install antennas, navigational antennas, on your property. And by the way, that'll benefit the airport, benefit the users. And by the way, we're willing to pay for it. So essentially we said, okay, gave them our standard lease rates that we give to everybody so it's consistent. After some questions and answers, they said, okay, when can we start? Really this is the conclusion to that, getting the lease in order and getting them in the airport to start serving us.
Good. Any questions on that? Steve?
I'm wondering how this system, it's being installed on the west side of the runway, and does this connect to the FAA control tower on the other side, or to your control room downstairs, or what's the technological connection?
Sure. So basically, we have an existing space in the Airport Operations Center that was previously housed by AT&T. All the equipment's going to be in there. It's going to be powered off our emergency generator if there was ever any issues with it going down. And then that information, when, say, an aircraft or a vehicle has these transponders that send out the information or receive it, that'll end up going to the FAA, if that makes sense. Okay. That's how it works. It's kind of like the older radar system, but it's a more efficient use, more reliable, increased kind of safety margins. Traditional radar is just in the air right at our airport, so we don't have any ground surveillance. This can implement essentially ground surveillance.
Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is an exciting opportunity, and I think they've chosen an airport like Pickens County because it's so well run and managed, and a pretty busy airport too. The question I have is, in the past we've had some real problems with equipment breakdown in the radar system. That's not ours, it's part of the FAA. But then they've had a hard time getting parts here in a reasonable time frame. We've had to have flights canceled, and it created some really unreliable air service that we saw crop up again every 4 or 5 months for a while. We've had some consistency now, but I just want to know that if we're going with this kind of cutting edge technology, are we going to have redundancy in place with the old systems as well? And will we have spare parts available readily, and will we have the type of reliability that we need for our air traffic here?
Can we cover that one? Sure. As of right now, the plan is to implement the ADS-B, start moving in this month, get it up and running, develop the procedures and everything. Our existing equipment that we're using right now is staying, so it's in addition to that to improve reliability. It's part of the FAA's steps for like the next gen process, and the contract ITTXLS has with the FAA, has specific guidelines like 48-hour response times and different things like that, and they're allowed access into the building to keep that equipment up to date and reliable.
Okay, so as I understand from our first reading on this, some aircraft will have the capacity to read the information and communicate with the transponders, and some older aircraft will not. And the aircraft that would like to take advantage of that system will, I'm not sure if they're starting with a subscriber fee or they will eventually be paying a subscriber fee to be part of that system. Is that correct?
I believe the final details of that have yet to be worked out. Full implementation of this in all aircraft throughout America isn't scheduled till, I forget the exact date, 2020, 2025. So those details are still being worked out. This, as Dustin alluded to, is really a layering system to navigation and really usability of the airport. Our existing facilities will still continue to be maintained. There's been some discussion of it eventually replacing ground-based radar, things like that, that are labor-intensive to maintain. But that has not been given a due date or anything like that. So these will be the existing facilities will be maintained and utilized to their full extent, while this is being brought on board slowly and methodically.
Okay. Well, I do support moving forward with this, but things like a 48-hour response time for problems does concern me as well once we get to a point where that is the primary system and not an ancillary system to what we already have. And I think that that's something we'll need to really improve with that contract. If we're going to be offering the service, they can't be 48 hours. Thanks.
Michael?
But this is a different arrangement, essentially, from the transponders that we've had trouble with, right? The FAA has been the primary operator of those transponders. This seems to me a different business model. This is ITT operating a service under contract for the FAA and paying a lease to us, which doesn't happen. This is essentially a new business model, isn't it?
It is. Yep.
Entirely.
All of our existing navigational aids on the facility do not have any charges tied to them. It's directly with the FAA. We have a requirement to provide, because we're a federal airport, we have requirements to provide them places to house their equipment. So we're very excited about it.
So this is essentially the way the contract services for the armed services is being done, and everything's being contracted out now. And the government is taking less direct control of these things and simply contracting them out to providers. So that's the main feature of this particular contract, it seems to me. Also, in where it's being housed, it's just a misspelling. It's cupola, not coppola. So.
Other questions? This is a public hearing. Anybody wishing to make a comment on this? I'm going to keep the public hearing open, Liddy, for the next couple items. Okay, bring it back to the board.
I would make a motion to approve an ordinance approving a contract for a site lease for ITT Excellus at the Aspen-Picken County Airport.
Second.
Second, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ryan, Dustin? Next is a resolution authorizing a budget carryover of projects. John Redmond is here again. This is the second reading on this topic.
John Redmond, Finance Director. We're here for the second reading on the supplemental for budget carry-forwards from 2012 to 2013. Budget carry-forward is not new spending. It's merely a transfer of unused appropriation from a prior year. And these are typically capital projects, such as a plan to purchase a new boiler or some remodeling or a vehicle, which for various reasons hasn't occurred in last year, but is still planned on being done either this year or in the future. These savings do not represent anything from unused payroll or operational expenditures. So it's usually something which we have a definitive plan for, and we still are planning on doing it. The budget director meets with every department and goes through line item by line item to see what she can flesh out as still being valid. So I think we have a high degree of certainty as to that these are still valid planned expenditures. Any questions?
Any questions? Rachel?
Well, just a comment as much as anything, John, and appreciate the memo and keeping track of all these numbers. But under the key discussion items, the very large paragraph, it kind of starts to run together a little bit for me, and perhaps in the future this sort of thing could be bullet pointed a little bit. But in particularly about 2/3 of the way down, after explaining the motor vehicle fee with revenue restricted by the state for the clerk and recorder's office, as well as the $1 e-recording surcharge fee for the clerk and recorder, it then just jumps into the fund balance would consist of money budgeted each year for the BOCC for capital improvements to the animal shelter. And so that is where I just got lost. I'm not sure what fund balance that was from or going to.
Okay. Well, in the future, we could try and make that a lot more clear.
But what is the fund balance would consist of money budgeted each year by the BOCC for capital improvements to the animal shelter? Is that just a new general fund transfer?
No. Historically, what we have done is it's almost like a cap reserve for the animal shelter, which we, in the animal shelter's budget every year, there's $10,000, which goes towards this fund. So it's like a savings account in essence. Within the fund itself, yeah.
Okay, yeah, because it just jumped right from the clerks to that fund balance. I couldn't tell where it was coming
Yeah,
from.
I think that's because we actually took about another 4 sentences out prior to that. So that's where the lack of flow is.
Okay, there we go. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Steve? And then Rob?
In poring over the figures, trying to understand how it works, I found what I think is a mistake.
Okay.
It's on the first page of the resolution under elections.
What page are you on, Steve?
It would be the page 4 of the packet. and it's the first page of the actual resolution. And under AD accessibility, it says 489, 489, and then the right-hand column, it says 24,000.
Yeah, that's, probably should read 489.
I think it should be 489, but
Correct.
then I started wondering if this was like a spreadsheet thing that the numbers carry automatically, or does somebody have to enter
No, this
each one individually on these items?
It's vulnerable to human error. Let's just put it that way.
And it looks like it's something they saw the 24,000 up above and just typed it in accidentally.
That's correct.
But then I started looking for other mistakes and I didn't find any, so.
That's one.
That's good.
Rob?
Yeah, John, a logistical question, and it kind of relates back to one of our work items yesterday, which has to do with one of the carry forward items that we ended up making an adjustment to reallocate it towards a new project. And this was the courthouse facility taking money that was allocated towards repaving the public works area to allocating some money to do some work in the courthouse. My question is that I understand that these are projects that are ongoing, and as you said in the beginning of your presentation, that this is not new spending. At what point, when we have a reduction in these, do they allocate the money back into the funds from which they are drawn from in the first place? So these are funds that were drawn from fund balances in 2012. They weren't spent, so they're carrying over to 2013. But if we have an under budget item, for instance, a project comes in at half the price, what we did in a supplemental request yesterday is we said, well, this item's coming in underpriced, so we're going to reallocate that money to some other project. I see that as new spending. So as opposed to you weren't here yesterday, so I'm kind of filling you in on this. As opposed to my suggestion is we're missing a journal entry there, which is allocating the money back into the original fund from which it came out of, and then allocating the new spending towards the courthouse. So at what point do we say, okay, we're carrying this forward, but we're either not going to do this project or this project is going to come in under budget, so we're going to reallocate that money back into the fund. I'm concerned with the fact that we're not seeing it as, you said, new spending. I mean, we made an adjustment yesterday to spend an additional $80,000 on our courthouse. To me, that's new spending, but we took it out of something that was allocated to be spent on paving at the Public Works building. So in my opinion, I'm not sure that we scrutinize that as new spending because it was already allocated, even though it was allocated into a different project. And this is actually in here under a line item. I found it under PW Site and Structure Projects. I'm assuming that's what it is because it's the number that matches up, 597, 420.
You're correct in your assumption there. I think that the nature of construction, as we've seen in a lot of our projects, is such that there's the ability to be exacting in projecting costs is very challenging. And so I think that there's perhaps a way of us trying to be generous in maybe setting up our budgets. Let's say we put a new boiler in this building and it's estimated at $100,000. It comes in at $65,000 or $70,000. There's perceived to be savings. And so it's kind of a question of how many times do you want to talk to people about approving every project that comes through the doors. It's true that there's a sweeping of these savings because there is a fair amount of float that exists. Perhaps we should set some kind of an allowance or a maximum amount of dollars that should go in that instance of, I've got a improvement in this building, I've got a similar improvement at the jail and a similar one at the courthouse. If it's all office improvements and we're just shifting the money from office improvement to office improvement, do we care? As opposed to saying, well, you're going to pave something or I'm going to build a new wall. Maybe it's the nature of what you're changing. I mean, whatever direction you guys can provide helps. But for us, what we're trying to do is say, overall, are we changing the amount that we're spending on capital projects? If you want to narrow that view to saying on construction versus paving, on equipment purchases versus something else, give us some guidance. But I understand how you can look at our budget and say, you plan on spending $1 million, you had $100,000 worth of savings and you spent it on this, that's new spending. And I want to approve that. You need to give us some guidance as to when that should occur.
And I guess, my philosophy is that just because we save money in one place doesn't mean that we can just spend it on something.
Yeah, I agree.
We should scrutinize it as new spending. And that's my take on it. And I made that comment yesterday. Not that I wouldn't have gotten to the same place.
No, I
but
understand.
I think we're missing a journal entry where we say, let's recognize the savings and then let's have the new spending.
Correct.
As opposed to, well, we're just going to take that savings and spend it and call it, capital expenditures.
Sure.
John?
Yeah, Rob, I think I understand where you're coming from. There's a difference between like a accounting journal entry and budget appropriations. And budget appropriations are permission, basically, where we come and seek permission from the board for expenditure of funds. And so what we did yesterday, I think, was essentially what you're saying, which is we had savings in one project and we wanted to use it for another project. And so we came to the board to ask permission to do that. And you could couch that any way you want. You could say, well, that should all flow back into fund balance and we should reconsider it, which, would be another way to look at it. But in terms of appropriation, in terms of the total authority that we had planned or that we had asked for and been given for spending on capital items, we are still within that total authority. And we are saying, but we wanted to use it in a different way. Had the board said no to that yesterday, then those savings would have just gone back into our fund balance and we wouldn't be doing the projects at the courthouse. And so I think we've ended up in the same
I agree with
place.
you.
Okay.
I agree we've ended up in the same place. It's a philosophical thing that if someone comes to me and says, we want to do this extra expenditure and we're doing it because we saved that money, I may not scrutinize that extra expenditure as much. But if you come to me and say, we want to take this out of our capital fund, because in essence it's coming out of the capital fund. Mm-hmm. We have overages all the time, and we take more money out of the capital fund. I'd rather see our savings go back into the capital fund and re-scrutinize things as new spending, because I think it is new spending.
So,
it's the board's decision to kind of decide on where they want to go, but
right,
and I'm not in favor of making decisions like we did yesterday, because I don't think it's the proper accounting technique for how we scrutinize decisions of making new spending decisions. And as it's not just because you saved on buying one thing that you could buy another. You have to determine whether or not it's the right reason to buy that other thing.
that's one approach, yeah. Michael?
Well, in the case of yesterday's discussion, there wasn't any savings. We just decided not to spend on the paving. So there's no savings there.
Well, there was an assumed savings on the amount of money that would be needed to repair the paving.
Well, we just deferred that. We deferred that spending.
Yeah. Same thing.
Not savings, though. I mean, if you want, I mean, you're entering into this argument, let's get clear about it.
Well, the money should go back to the capital fund,
Well,
is
that's
what I'm saying.
I know that's what you're saying. But in the case of yesterday's example, there wasn't savings. We just reallocated a certain amount of money out of capital expenditures from one capital project to another capital project. And so that seems to me appropriate in the budget process. I mean, that's what we've done. We said for capital projects, we have this much allocated. And in the case of yesterday's discussion, it was that we have funds within a capital fund, and we're just putting them in a different category. And I think the examination of whether or not it was appropriate was thorough.
I agree.
There wasn't a sense of, you know, I've been in other discussions where it hasn't been as thorough, unfortunately. So.
Rachel?
Yeah, you know, for me, the matter did come back to us for us to look at. We're familiar with the courthouse project already for better space allocation and utilization. And, you know, whether it's new spending or reallocation of spending towards a project, I feel like I give it the same scrutiny. You may feel that you give it less scrutiny, or that the memo's not as thorough, and then we could send the memo back or ask additional questions of our staff as to why. But I don't want to make additional work. The items do come back to us each time when there's going to be some sort of, you know, this project's over, we're going to either need to cut these components out, or we're going to need to find funds from somewhere else within the savings in the capital fund. So again, I feel like I give it the same scrutiny to the needs of the project and the merits of the project. So I'm okay with this going forward. I realize you're just making the point, and we all occasionally offer different things of how we think the budget could read a little better or be more understandable to the layperson, so I appreciate your comments.
Okay, so it sounds like we're going to continue along the same path as we have in the past, at least for the majority of the board, with agreement on that. Any other questions on this supplemental budget carryover? Seeing none, I would accept a motion to approve.
And you've had public comment already?
Thank you, Rachel. This is a public hearing. Anybody wishing to make a comment on this, please state your name.
Gideon Kaufman, it just brings back a conversation I had with my daughter yesterday. I gave her permission to buy a prom dress for a certain amount of money. And then when the bill came in, there was a prom dress and a pair of shoes. And her analogy was, well, I saved on the prom dress so I could use the money for the shoes. And it just, I think makes Rob's point a little levity on that.
Did you approve it?
Covered with after the fact, I had no choice.
The difference, of course, is we came back and asked if we could buy the shoes.
That's true. I'll send her to John in the future.
Okay, any other further public comments on this item? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board.
I would make a motion to approve the resolution authorizing budget carryover projects
As corrected?
as corrected.
Second?
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you, John.
Thank you.
The next is a resolution authorizing Pickett County Clerk and Recorder to conduct a November 5th, 2013 election by mail ballot in accordance with CRS 1-75-101, and we have withdrawn this, but this is noticed as a public hearing. Somebody wishing to comment on this? Seeing none at this time, I'm going to close the public hearing on all these consent public hearing items.
Do we need a motion to table that, or to withdraw it, or?
It's withdrawn.
It's just withdrawn. It's gone.
Gone.
Okay, well, let's take a 15-minute break while we get set up for our land use public hearings.
Great.
rezoning to CD PUD. This is the second reading that was continued from April 24th. Ms. Suzanne Wolf will present.
Okay. So it's actually the rezoning and then as well as approval of the CDPUD plan, growth management exemption and activity envelope, both of those at second reading. So there's an ordinance and a resolution in front of you, just to be clear for the record. So you did approve this on first reading in February. And there are several issues that were raised at that meeting that I will walk through. We'll use the map behind you and I can zoom in on it just to try and get a little more clear. But we'll start with the first issue was related to revisions to the activity envelopes. And so just to reorient everyone, I guess, so here's North Fork Road going up. If you're familiar, you end up here at the Elk Wallow Campground and then continue on. This is the Himmeland Reservoir. The two activity envelopes are the areas in purple that are proposed. The lots that are owned by what's referred to as the North Fork Neighbors Group, or the neighbors, are all located over here on the other side of the North Fork of the frying pan. And here are the two access points. This is the dam road we talked about, and then this is the, whoops, where'd my little red thing go there? There's the other access point into the subdivision. And so as you can see, it's not a real subdivision, but it's easiest to kind of refer to it that way, I guess. So anyway, this is the North Fork Spur here and North Fork Loop Road coming this way. So back to the activity envelopes. There was a request at first reading to revise the activity envelope, particularly this one. And here, I'll come in a little bit closer on that. Under the purple, you sort of lose, but the buildings, we talked about the existing buildings, there's an existing cabin and then some ruins of buildings, are all located right in this area, underneath the purple, basically. So in the last site plan or activity envelope plan, they had proposed a historic building activity envelope or historic activity envelope, and then a separate activity envelope over here for the new development. So the discussion at the last meeting was to revise that envelope to minimize impacts on wildlife. We had discussed the wildlife that's on the hillside up here. And the envelope actually dipped over this power line and extended further down into this area. So what's proposed here is combining these two envelopes. As we discussed at the last meeting, staff had not supported and the board didn't support the designation of that cabin to the register. We do want to acknowledge that there are historic resources there. That would be done by the inventory, but this basically combines what was a historic envelope and the other activity envelope into one and leaves basically this area that's clustered near those existing buildings as the area for new development in this envelope. So I don't have the comparison of what was there and what's proposed here, but there was more to this envelope that extended out to the west. We didn't discuss...
Suzanne,
yes.
let me ask you, it's still bisected by the road. It shows...
Yes, I know it does show through, but it would have to... that we have a right-of-way for the road. So there would be a small piece of it on the south side of the road, really just to encompass, there are a couple of those existing ruins are in that area, but the envelope should be separated by the road. And then the other envelope has also been revised slightly, which wasn't specifically discussed at the last meeting, but it has been reduced a bit, basically on both ends. And I don't know if is that
yes.
Generally the gist of it. So basically it's cut down, and if you remember this, you can see that the swath here, that's our setback off of the creek that's required. And so then here's that envelope. It was the other activity envelope number 2 that I think was of much more concern, but they have also reduced this envelope a bit in size. Oh, the other thing I brought up about, back to the first envelope. There is an intermittent stream that runs through here. and right next to, near those historic structures. So there, essentially would be language that obviously those existing buildings remain, but new development would have to comply with the setback, the 100-foot setback off of that. So that would also be reflected as part of the recorded activity envelope plan. So related to the activity envelope, that's sort of just the physical layout of the envelopes. The next issue we had discussed was whether or not these envelopes should be included in the conservation easement or excluded from the conservation easement. The applicant has proposed to exclude them, which essentially means there would be sort of, within the easement would cover the area that did not include these activity envelopes. Paul Holsinger from Open Space and Trails is here. He had made comments when he was first referred the application saying that the county would prefer to see envelopes included. The applicant, as part of the packet that was submitted for this meeting, has presented an argument about why they would still like to exclude them from the easement. And Paul did also then respond to that. I think I'll kind of leave that discussion to let them jump in and help you with their positions on that, rather than me just trying to put words in their mouths. But so anyway, that's a point of discussion, obviously, is whether the envelope should be included or excluded from the conservation easement. George, do you want me to kind of run through my whole list, or do you want to stop and...
Are there any questions at this point?
I take you running through the list.
Okay, and
let's
then
run
you can
through it just
backtrack and have everybody else weigh in. The next issue was the access issues for the neighbors. The applicant and the neighbor group have continued to work together to try and address issues related to access, like actual physical access on the roads to their properties, as well as recreational use and access to the Nichols property. You have information in front of you on where they stand in those negotiations, and I think the point where the points that they have agreed on in terms of then moving forward to finalize agreements. This map does show the recreational easements in the various areas that they've talked about. Again, I think it'll probably be easier to have Allison show you that, but the specific points they've agreed on. But it would essentially, they're agreeing to, in terms of access to the properties, they'll grant easements along these roads where they cross the Nichols property to ensure that everyone has legal access to their properties. They would allow for emergency access only across the dam road. And that would obviously be emergency access for anyone through there, but it would not be able to be used as general access by these lot owners. And then the recreational uses, again, I'll let them further elaborate, but it has to do with use of the reservoir and boats on the reservoir, use of the ability to hike and snowshoe or cross-country ski through portions of the Nichols property, and also to fish along the North Fork. And again, I'll let them get into those details. So the neighbors, and Fred Smith is here. He submitted a letter to you, and as well as Bill and Suzanne Green. They're all here. They've submitted letters to you, and they are in agreement that they're at the point with the applicant that I think they all agree on what the points are that should be included in these agreements. Their concern is that a couple of people have said to me the devil's in the details, and they're concerned about saying we're all good and then finding out later that those agreements, that they're going to run into issues as they actually hammer out the details on those agreements. So they have made a request that, they said their understanding from the last board meeting essentially was that you wanted those agreements finalized before second reading could move forward. I guess I would say that wasn't necessarily how I understood it. I walked away feeling that you wanted to know that those points of agreement, that they had agreed on the points that would be included in those, but I did not anticipate that we would have final signed agreements with all of the 14 adjacent landowners before we would move forward on second reading here. So that's a point, I think, for you all to decide whether you're comfortable at this point without those agreements being in place moving forward with this or not. I guess the related piece to that is the conservation easement, and our process, we've only done this process one other time, But the way we've assumed the process works is we go through the land use review and approval, and as a condition of that, it's a condition of the approval that they finalize the conservation easement. In this case, and that's how it worked on the last, when we did the CDPUD for Middle Ranch. In this case, they have presented a draft conservation easement up front to be looked at as part of this review process, but it hasn't been looked at to the degree that it's ready to be brought forward to you for full acceptance. And we had anticipated that that would be a separate step that would follow this process. That's another sort of piece that the neighbors have brought up, and I guess the question for you all is if you feel that that should be accepted by the BOCC concurrent with approval of the land use application, in which case, obviously, we would have to continue the second reading here. Again, Paul with Open Space has not completed his complete review of that easement. I mean, at this point, he'd reviewed it for it to be found sort of big issues, things like including or excluding the activity envelope, some of those bigger pieces, but he has not gone into the detailed review of it. So if you wanted that to happen, that the easement be accepted at the same time as the land use approval is granted, he'll need some time to finish his review, take it to the Open Space Board, and then get it in front of you with an ordinance for acceptance, at which point we could bring the two pieces of this together. But so that's kind of, I guess, a question of how you prefer to move forward. Again, our understanding was that this process could move forward and the conservation easement would follow as a condition of this approval. But obviously that's, you have the opportunity to weigh in on that, how that should proceed. Let's see. Okay. So that's the question about the neighbor access issues. There have been some questions asked at the last meeting about the water rights pertinent to the property, and information has been provided by the applicant on that issue. There's been some discussion between the applicant's attorney, Allison Easley, and John Ely about how the water rights should be addressed in the conservation easement. And I guess again, I think I'll leave that as to which rights should be encumbered by the easement or not. I think they can probably better describe and address that than I can, but obviously I summarized in the memo. There are rights associated with the reservoir, and then there's actually an irrigation water right. And those are essentially the water rights we're talking about whether or not they should be encumbered by the conservation easement. Paul Holsinger, in his comments, did talk about the value of including water rights in the easement. He would recommend that both of those rights be included in the easement. And again, John Ely can further address that. And then the last things were just, I think, some informational items about North Fork Road. Nothing, I think, not really discussion points, but the county does plow the road up to Elk Wallow Campground. There was a question about what's the priority of that, and basically what I got from GR Fielding was that it's low on the priority list. So what does that mean? How quickly do they get there after a storm? I'm not sure. I can give you that detail, but it is plowed by the county as far as Elk Wallow. There were questions asked about the bridge on the North Fork Loop, which is the bridge over here. That was replaced. We weren't able to find any documents in our office. I said recent time. I was thinking maybe in the last 10 years. Fred Smith emailed me. He was thinking maybe about 1997, 98. I'm not sure. I know Susan Pearson tried to look through some of our documents. I don't know that she got into probably what goes back to Bud Eiler and may still be in boxes of paper. Back to that time frame. So at this point, we didn't really have any information on the county side regarding that bridge and what standard, and did we review it, did we not, were there, so we weren't able to find anything very useful in terms of that bridge, other than there is acknowledgement that it was replaced, I guess maybe more about 15 years ago than 10 years ago. And then the power line road, there was, at the last meeting, there came up, I think it was Rob was looking at it, pulled up Google, and there was a label on there about a power line road, and I think GR and Bert Pierce had some interesting trying to trace that one down, but there is no county road in here that is the power line road. That actually, it's farther up here. It's if I moved the map, but there is a power line that goes up the hillside over here. There is a section of road when you continue up the North Fork and come around. I think it's up towards Salar and Deemer Lakes. Francis is traipsed all over there. So I think there is a piece of road that's up in there that may be referred to as the Power Line Road. But essentially, it's been confirmed that there is not a county road that comes off of the North Fork and cuts across the Nichols property along that power line and continues up. So there isn't a question there of public access across that portion of the property. So I think that's it for the issues I brought up in my memo. Staff at this point is recommending that you approve on second reading the ordinance for the rezoning and the resolution for the CDPUD plan and other. Obviously knowing that you'll have some more discussion about kind of this process and how whether you're ready to make that follow that recommendation or not at this point.
So it seems like some of the issues that are here to discuss or maybe outstanding is regarding whether to include or exclude the conservation easement on the building envelopes, as well as whether to include or exclude the conservation easement as part of the water rights. Correct?
Yes.
And then some of the concerns from the neighbors, it seems like, I'll ask John Ely if we can address that as Suzanne has suggested, that it becomes conditional upon granting the permit, but it's conditional based on the outcome of the conservation easements and the outcome of the neighbors' access from the roads and recreation. That can all be conditional part of the approval, so we can go ahead and, if we want to, we could do that approval based those on these conditions that have to be met before anything can actually go further.
The way I would answer that is first, yes, the board is in a situation to go forward with finality on the rezoning and with the development approval. So there's that. The only issue I have with and as far as the conservation easement, there's two items that are outstanding that Suzanne mentioned and Georgie referred to, can be discussed now and simply resolved now as part of this approval, or can be, or the approval can be adopted as proposed. It is addressed in condition 6 of the proposed resolution, I believe. And the conservation easement would be reviewed again at any rate by the BOCC, simply because it's an interesting property that has to be accepted by a separate board. So that would be brought back in due course, and pursuant to the way Suzanne has the resolution of approval drafted, is that would have to be done within 180 days of the date of final approval. And that's certainly acceptable that way. The issue with the neighbors is a little different in that I'm uncomfortable in deferring the board's governmental regulatory action to a condition beyond the board's control. In other words, a sign-off by adjoining property owners or neighbors. It puts the situation of the approval somewhat up in the air and would leave it open in a way that falls to an action of a third party that we can't control ultimately. Obviously, the board wants to, from the discussions at the previous review of this matter, wants to have those issues resolved as much as possible, and perhaps they are resolved as much as we can take them here by the representations of the applicant, and those representations being incorporated within the resolution of approval. But to defer it out to whatever steps might be required to obtain a signature or signed off by every property owner is it's a little too outside of our realm, and involves the actions of third parties that we can't control. So, to be honest, I'd be more comfortable in resolving the matter now based upon the representations of the applicant in a condition and not have it defer to the requirements of the completion of some action by a third party.
But it seems like, at least I'm sure the neighbors will respond to this, that they want some assurance in a written format that this is the agreement that they've they've agreed to, versus right now it's verbal and a handshake, but you know, who knows how that could be tweaked or changed.
And that goes to my comment as to incorporating within the resolution the representations made by the applicant. So the applicant is bound by the representation to the quality and the extent and the points of access of the easement. But the applicant is not necessarily held up trying to get signatures and sign-offs and acceptances on the grant of an easement by a number of parties, all of which might not be home on any given day.
Okay. Rachel?
Yeah. I see what you're saying, John, and I think that, you know, while I had thought we might be able to pass this with some sort of condition that the conservation easement will not be accepted until the agreement with the landowners nearby has also been signed. And so the full ordinance would not take effect until all those things have happened. But on the other hand, you could then really, not that it would, but hypothetically, you could have one of the 14 neighbors say, I'm not signing unless these other 3 new conditions are put on place, and it would hold the approval of the application kind of hostage to one individual outside of the county's jurisdiction, control, or any sort of responsibility could hold the whole process up.
And exactly, and I'm not implying that that's the situation. In fact, contrary to that, it seems that everybody is working toward a resolution. But like I said, it makes me nervous to get into a situation where the government's regulatory activity is held up for a third party or for events that are beyond either the applicants or our control.
Other questions for Suzanne? Michael?
What are our rights on the North Fork Road? Do we own that road? Who owns it?
We have right-of-way, definitely through this section, through the Nichols property, we have dedicated right-of-way.
Okay.
It's designated as a Forest Service road, so, you know, to have a USFS number.
But there's definitely deeds for this property to the county.
Okay. Rachel?
Yeah, Suzanne, on the activity envelopes that are near the, that have the 100-foot setback from the stream margin, what can occur outside the activity envelope? Would native vegetation in that buffer zone would be required to be left as is?
Correct.
Okay, so you couldn't have someone kind of clear cutting it down to improve the view
That's,
outside?
our condition always says, you know, no vegetation removal outside of the activity envelope, so.
Thank you, just want to confirm that.
Other questions for Suzanne at this time? I wonder, yes?
So, Suzanne, we talked about plowing and low priority, and so this approval of these 2 activity envelopes, this conservation development, that's not going to change that in any way.
As my understanding would be, there would be no change to that unless they came and asked the county to change the classification of the road, and that would
we
have
don't do that automatically.
No, that has to-
Anybody's allowed to make that request.
Right. That goes through a process for that request. At this point, it remains the service level
So
it
this
is.
doesn't imply that there is going to be a change to any service on that road?
No, that would.
I wonder, since we're doing a staff presentation before we get to the applicant, whether we would have Paul give a presentation on where he is to date on his thoughts on the conservation easements.
Yep. Hi, I'm Paul Olson, your land officer for Lincoln County Open Space and Trails. The
conservation easement was forwarded on to me by Suzanne to take a quick look at it and see if anything popped out that I could see improvements or there might be a hang-up. And the two things that I saw were the envelopes being excluded, which we have in the past excluded envelopes on a couple others conservation easements. And the issue that I had with that is that since we have the opportunity to really conserve the property, I thought it appropriate to include the envelopes because it affords the highest level of conservation for a property, and it ensures that the land use and restrictions will be uniform throughout. And the problems that have arisen with excluded envelopes is that when you have an extra boundary that is protected and not protected, there's usually some sort of encroachment that could occur, and the easement is perpetual, so it just takes a lot of diligence in stewarding those boundaries, which is a reason why I'd like to include them. But I mean, the decision is ultimately up to you guys as well. I mean, if we did include the envelope, I could see us, you know, crafting language that perpetually ties it to the CDPUD zoning right now, in case in the future, 500 years from now, the zoning is changed. So that's the reasoning behind that. The water rights issue, as a general rule as well, if water rights are associated with a property, we'd like to tie them to that property and have them not be severed ever from the property, because those water rights definitely enhance the conservation values of the property. They add to the wildlife habitat, they add to the scenic quality, and if those things are dried up, it definitely diminishes the conservation value. I don't know specifically where the water rights are applied on this property, especially the irrigation right. So that'd be something I would look at as well, but that's just where I fall, just at a broad overlook.
All right, I have a couple of questions. Suzanne, do you recall on the Middle Ranch, when we did the conservation easement, did we include the building envelopes there or not?
Allison's shaking her head. She's the one, she went back and looked. They were excluded. And in this case, I mean, the land use code doesn't give us any guidance in terms of, it just says, put a covenant or a conservation easement on a property that's part of the CD, that's on, you know, with the CDPUD. So then essentially we looked at open space to see what, you know, their best practices in terms of that. So like Paul said, I think we have done it both ways in the past in conservation easements in general, whether it be related to the CDPUD or not. But I think for me, one of the things Paul had said was, you know, if they're excluded, and he's talked a little about the boundaries, I mean, that activity envelope is that activity envelope. If there's really no opportunity for them to someday come back and say, boy, if I could have that little end at the east, I would get rid of, you know, 5 acres on this end and move it a little bit this way. At that point, they're negotiating with land that's, under the conservation easement, when this is not. So it's very difficult to make an argument that then it's going to be more appropriate to develop a small piece of the conservation easement. There's no, you're not improving the conservation value. So this defines it forever in terms of that envelope. And so I guess from what Paul was saying, I was kind of seeing that actually if everything's under the easement, there is maybe a little bit more flexibility if in the future they go, wouldn't it be better if maybe we could do the activity envelope a little bit differently? It would be reviewed through open space as well as, you know, under the land use review, and that could be decided. But I think if it's excluded, it's actually more restricting to them for any future sort of flexibility. So that piece to me kind of, you know, we deal enough with, we know everybody comes back and asks for amendments to everything we do. So I guess that kind of spoke to me on that issue.
And then on the water rights, John, is there another way to ensure that they can't sever water rights besides having it under a conservation easement?
Well, you can achieve the same goal through a variety of different instruments. The question for the board is, I don't think whether the conservation easement is the appropriate vehicle or some other instrument is the way to go. The question is whether or not to encumber the water rights at all. There's a letter that Ms. Eastley wrote that was in the packet. It's somewhere around page 26, page 26 of the digital packet. I'm not sure how to direct it to it otherwise. At any rate, her comments in the letter in regards to the water rights echo those that Suzanne made earlier, and that there are two primary water rights that are pertinent to the property. One is a storage right in the reservoir, and one is a direct flow diversion right that's been used for irrigation purposes. The storage right is 92 acre feet. The direct flow diversion right is 1 CFS.
1 acre foot.
Oh, it is? Okay. And the area that's irrigated was on both sides of the road, and there was a map, I think, at the last hearing that showed the irrigated acreage. It's not this one, but we've seen it before. The practice of the county, of course, is to continually try to improve conservation easements that we accept, and to work with property owners in regards to particular situations that their individual situation presents. As the program, with the Space and Trails program, has evolved and the use of conservation easements has evolved with it, the documents that we tend to accept have improved over time. And I would say that consistent with Paul's comments just now and in the letter or the memo that he wrote that's in the packet as well, that the latest and greatest practices is to encumber the water right with the conservation easement, such that the water right remains pertinent to the property. And the reasons are fairly obvious, is to maintain the conservation values that are associated with the property at the time of the grant of the conservation easement in perpetuity. And it's obvious that that water rights and the real estate that the water right is pertinent to are fairly integral to each other. In fact, the land without the pertinent water right changes dramatically in character for the most part. This property is and I can see Ms. Easley's point in her letter, is that it's a little bit different in that this is not the water right is decreed for agricultural purposes, but this is not it's not a ranch, and so I think the board has latitude to take a look at the individual circumstance of this property and the goals that the board might want to accomplish with the conservation easement. But from a point of departure, the staff's recommendation is to include the water rights in the conservation easement so that they're prepared. And as I said, it's not so much whether you do it in a conservation easement or some other type of covenant or other type of restriction, it's whether or not to preserve those rights in association with the property or not, let them to be independently conveyed or let the use be changed to some other purpose in the future.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Paul, John, or Suzanne at this point on the staff presentation? We can always come back. Okay, we'll turn this over to the applicants. You just introduce yourself for the record, please.
I'm Francis Kruzmanich. I'm the land use planner representing the Nichols Family Trust. Beside me is Allison Eastley, the attorney for the Nichols Family Trust, who has been working with the neighbors on the various easements, and she can go into that into some detail, and the water rights. And I guess to keep things short and simple, we pretty much are really happy with the staff's comments and recommendations. We haven't finished with the neighbors. We've had some things slow us down, so if we could do it by a condition somehow, what John was talking about. The reason is, for instance, when we want to give access easements where they don't exist. to the properties that you can see on the map right there, you can see that there's already an access easement in place along those lots. There's a couple of little spots where the road actually goes outside of the easement. And then when you go upstream toward Himalayan Reservoir, that road is not defined. So we need to basically get a surveyor out there and do a center line of the existing road and then put the easement in. And frankly, there's been too much. There's still snow back in the trees along there. So we can't write an easement without a description. So that's what's holding us up there. And that should be done fairly soon now that we're getting a little bit of melt. As far as activity envelope 2, that does include the road. Of course, we know it's a right-of-way. I really didn't want to create 3 different envelopes because of the stream and because of the old buildings there. So the intent of that activity envelope is to allow us to maintain those existing structures even though they're not historic. We want to keep it within an activity envelope, so if they need some work, we can. Also, our irrigation pump, which uses our 1 CFS for irrigation, provides water across the street to that cabin area. That's what's irrigated around the existing building. And then we kept up just enough property to the west to put in an additional residence at some time in the future. And we cut that envelope in half approximately, and I left what I thought would be the minimum amount to give us stream setbacks. And so anyhow, we think that's acceptable to us. And what other points? So I guess the biggest issue for us is condition number 6, and it does have to do with the water and also with the way we did the conservation easement. I lost my page here, but when we started this and when I read the code, we really feel that the conservation easement should exclude the activity envelopes. There are other properties here that are going to be outside of the conservation envelope also, which are the dozen properties that exist. And we think that, we have the same condition as they do. We're essentially 2 lots surrounded by a conservation easement, just as there are 12 properties surrounded by a conservation easement. But more importantly, when you look at the actual land use code, the CD/PUD Conservation Development Plan, we had Paul talk about uses. Well, under this section of the code, it tells you what your permitted uses are on your activity envelope. And then it tells you what are special review uses. If Paul's concern is those could change someday in the future, why don't we just drop these uses as is into the conservation easement, and then they would be there. The problem with including activity envelopes under the conservation easement, for always in the future, a property owner is going to be subject to some staff person say, well, I didn't want this here, or I don't think this is an appropriate use. It's just going to be a subjective, ad hoc, depending on who's there that day kind of thing. And, Paul's not going to be here forever, so he has some views of what may be good there, and somebody else comes after him is going to have a totally different view. The code already tells us what uses are allowed and aren't allowed. Just need to refer to that. And secondly, when we went through the code, it tells us development, max residential development. Part E of this code section says, all land outside of activity envelopes designated in the CD/PUD process shall be designated as preservation areas. It says, these preservation areas shall be preserved in perpetuity by a conservation easement or covenant approved by the county attorney, which at a minimum shall restrict the property from the future non-agricultural development and subdivision. And where did that go? All land outside of activity envelopes designated in CD/PUD process shall be designated as preservation areas. So it's the first sentence. All land outside of the activity envelopes shall be designated. That's what we did. We just followed the rule book. And now your staff has a different idea. Well, I don't know if it's a better idea or not. I haven't spent a lot of time studying it. We went by this, and this is what Middle Ranch did. The other person, the only other person that did this option, did it the way we're doing it. So all I'm saying is somebody has a better idea and wants to do it differently, well, let's do a code amendment, discuss it, and figure out which is the better way to go. But I have to think that some thought was put into this code when it was written, and it was written the opposite of what Paul and the staff are suggesting now. So I'm saying we agree with the code as written, and we think that's the better way to pursue it. But Allison can speak to that and the water rights also. And, I do want to note that I did public notice affidavit.
You can give it to Suzanne.
Suzanne. Forgot about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Francis. Allison Easley from Holland Hart for the applicant. And thank you to Suzanne and Paul and John because they have challenged me to do a better job with these documents. I want to talk about three things: the activity envelopes, the water rights, and negotiations with the neighbor group. With respect to the activity envelopes, and as Francis was just touching on, just from a very bare bones kind of legal analysis point of view, the first place we look to is the code and is it clear. And when I read this provision in the code for CD PUD zoning, it seemed to me back when we first started this preparing our application material that it was clear that activity envelopes were meant to be carved out and excluded from a conservation easement. And only at a point of confusion would it be appropriate for staff to interpret the code. And so there's just a difference of opinion between me and Paul on that one issue. Theoretically, I look at it as kind of the Swiss cheese versus blanket easement approach, and theoretically it does seem that you would get better conservation value protection by a blanket easement, but practically speaking, because as Francis mentioned, there are multiple neighbor parcels that are already essentially carved out, and because the activity envelopes are going to already have some amount of development as permitted by the zoning and would be referenced in the conservation easement, the blanket idea, I think, is really only conceptual. You kind of have essentially a Swiss cheese model going into place anyway, so why not just call it the Swiss cheese model and carve out these activity envelopes? And third, the activity envelopes, if they're carved out for just implementation purposes, seem to make it clearer for both the property owner and for anybody who is interpreting the conservation easement for Pickens County, clearer to understand what is and what is not allowed. Otherwise, you're going to have to ask yourself, as the county, or maybe this is deeded to ABLT down the road, ask yourself, does this frustrate the purposes of the conservation easement? And that is a tough question to answer time and time again. And so it seems to me that both, well, I guess from a legal, theoretical, and practical approach, it seems better to carve them out. As to the water rights, Suzanne may have mentioned, although I can't recall now, that we had originally gone from a place of having two water rights that would be not, they would be included in the conservation easement, but they could be separated from the property if the county agreed. That was our original proposed language. After discussing these items with Suzanne and John, we agree that the idea here is to have a beautiful piece of the frying pan area conserved, and so keeping 92 acre-feet tied to that property seems like something the applicant is happy to do. And there's no real practical benefit for the applicant in a water law scenario to sever the property and the water rights, because you wouldn't get a whole lot of benefit, just water law analysis wise. As far as the irrigation use, again, the idea of keeping the property maintained and the conservation values protected, we do like the idea of encumbering the irrigation water, but not to the extent that it would frustrate the property owner's ability to irrigate on that property. The water rights degree specifically limits irrigation to proximate to, and it's very defined, even by a legal description, to the historic cabin area in the upper left-hand or right-hand corner. The idea of encumbering the water rights would be acceptable so long as we could carve out that changes of water rights and location of use on the property were to be allowed. And then finally, coming to the third item, the negotiations with the neighbor group. One of our goals throughout this process has been to keep a piece of property special and also to enhance certainty for the county, for the property owner, and for the neighbors. And I'm very confident that we will come to a full resolution in a written agreement that is recorded, both to clarify access for the neighbors and also to grant certain recreational uses. But as John has picked up on, the idea of tying our land use approvals to these negotiations it's not required by the code, and it creates some uncertainty for the applicant. And as a middle path, we suggested that as a condition to approval, since we think access is something that can be very easily negotiated and finalized, that access could be a part of any final map that were recorded concurrent with the conservation easement or otherwise, but not to tie the historic, or the recreational use component to land use approval, since we don't know if we'll get full sign-off, and ultimately we suggested that either it be in terms of certainty, it be an agreement between the landowners that were to be recorded, or a decree by a court of competent jurisdiction regarding the prescriptive easement claims, because then you've got clarity and you've got resolution. It's just we don't know the form it will take. So those are our proposals, and happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Okay, thank you. I think, Suzanne, this is only the second CDPUD that we've come before us. Middle Ranch was the first one, and that continues to come before us. So that's being the first one. I think that is really a learning process in terms of how well written that code really was and is at the time. So there's always room for improvement. And Francis, as you know, even though the code is written as it is right now, we're constantly changing, upgrading codes. So that becomes very subjective as well. So regardless of who is sitting in Paul's seat or Suzanne's seat, codes can come and go as people can come and go. So my question is, what would be the downside then in terms of just encumbering the whole property under a conservation easement? That way it's clear and concrete, and you don't have to worry about any changes in code or any changes in staff. I'm not seeing the downside.
Well, the downside is, one, it's not the law right now. Your law reads differently than you want it, and changing it is fine, but change it through a process that considers all the sides, take public testimony, do some analysis. We haven't had that from staff. We just had, well, I think we ought to do it differently because we've had some problems with the first one we've done. Well, the proper context then is to look at your code language and revise it if necessary. But there's been no discussion about this process or whether it's good or bad. We don't have any examples from other places. Nobody's spent any time on it because it just kind of popped up out of the blue. We were going along our merry way doing what we thought was right by the code and right legally from our people. So I can't give you a great explanation of why one is superior to the other, only that our legal counsel thinks the way we did it is superior, and they have quite a bit of experience doing easements, and the code doesn't provide for another alternative process as suggested by the staff. So we're saying let's stick with what we like and what you guys like by the written word. When a person comes in the door to apply, we can't guess what somebody's going to come up with. We can only look at the rules and do the best we can under them. And it's just like I've said about the setbacks from the stream. I think there's a lot of problems with that, but we're following it because we have to, and that's the rule. That's what's adopted. Would I like to come in and discuss stream setbacks and do some code amendments? You bet. But I got a code that I have to, this is the law today, and we're trying to follow it as best we can. And I don't know whether the alternative recommended by staff is a better one or not. So that's where I'm at on
All right,
it.
thank you. Questions from the board? Michael?
I have a question for John. John, when a county right-of-way splits a lot, it essentially makes two lots, is that right?
Generally speaking.
Generally speaking. So in this case, we have a county road splitting an activity envelope. Will that activity envelope be a unitary, or is it split into then two activity envelopes?
The effect of the activity envelope and its ability for development will be governed by the resolution of approval. The consequence of the presence of the county road will not change the profile of the approval.
Okay.
Rob?
Allison, were you suggesting with the agreement with the neighbors that we should leave it out of this agreement and just have you come up with agreement that's filed separately outside of this?
It was similar to what's already drafted, which is as a condition of the approval. Slightly different in that you would have two different tracks for the access agreement and the the recreational use agreement. And the access agreement could be filed, I think, within a certain amount of time. And it seems to be more the county's purview because access to lots is something that is generally required when you submit for land use approvals nowadays. For the recreational use, we were proposing that it not be tied to a certain amount of time so that you couldn't kidnap, or whatever term Rachel used, couldn't leverage the process with between the negotiating parties. So no time component, and instead of a recorded agreement, it would give the negotiating parties an ability to either negotiate and come to a written agreement or resolve their issues in court. And that's only to address the simple fact that there are so many different parties. I'm only dealing with one representative of that group, and it is a large and maybe at times difficult group to wield into one legal document.
Rob, you done?
Yeah, I can't think of what my follow-up is to
Well,
that. It might come up.
Given the amount of time that this has been in process, why haven't you reached an agreement with the landowner? Because that would be to your advantage. We wouldn't be having this discussion.
Right, and I think that I'm sure Gideon and the people behind you will want to speak to that. But two things. One, we have a theoretical agreement. You were supplied with it, basically the terms of that agreement. And like Suzanne has mentioned, the devil is in the details, and it has to be written down. And I am in the process of and have drafted the agreements, but the details are tough. And it's just taken me a while. And one of the details happens to be the fact that we don't have a survey that is totally workable for me, for my purposes, my level of detail. And I would like to see a survey of the as-built road versus where the easement that covers the road. I'd like to see where the spurs are that come off the road to the different neighbors' lots. Items that I believe in short time we can resolve, but in the time that we've had, it hasn't been enough for me to put my documents together and circulate them.
What are the principles that you've both agreed on, and both parties? What are those, in general, what are those principles?
Sure. There's three, and they're represented on this map. It's hard to see, but in the dashes and the blue dots, and then in one area that you can't quite see, but it's canoe storage and short-term parking. So to get to the dashes, those dashes represent hiking, cross-country ski, snowshoeing, maybe one other use, but all passive uses of the property, along what is asserted to be trails that have been historically used by the neighbor group.
And you're waiting for surveys for those trails?
I haven't even decided if surveys of the trails are important. The surveys, to me, more important for the access, just so that we get it right. Deciding whether to vacate an existing easement that might be totally useful versus leaving that easement in place and adding on to it with a new one. The next thing on the map are the blue dots, and that serves as indication of where the fishing will be allowed. Fishing is allowed for the most part on both sides of the bank of the North Fork River, although in certain areas, especially to the west and near the activity envelope to the west, the bigger one, the neighbor group agreed to only fish on the south side. And then the final area, or excuse me, there's also canoeing that we've negotiated. Canoeing on the reservoir, limited to a certain number of canoes at one time. And then canoe storage and short-term parking, basically to facilitate use of canoes on the reservoir.
So those are the principles that essentially both parties agree on. Recreational use of the reservoir, and access to their physical property.
Yes.
And what you're saying is, within those principles, there's specifics of surveys and that kind of thing that need to be worked out. But those are what you're representing now as mutually agreed upon principles for both parties.
That's right.
Any further questions at this point? If not, we can come back. This is a public hearing. I'll open this up to the public. If you just identify yourself, please.
If I could just steal a little piece of the desk, right?
Yes, please.
I tend to drop things. I've made a couple of notes, but I...
Go ahead.
For the record, my name is Fred Smith. My wife and I, Barbara, have owned our property on the North Fork for 24 years, and we've had a house there for that period of time. The dam was built back in the late 60s, and some of the owners that are still there were there at that time when the lake was constructed. I'm going to try to wear two hats today. The first hat is representing Tommy Stewart, who owns one of the lots that's downstream of the bridge. He is partners in another lot next to that is undeveloped, and so he has a partnership interest in that lot as well. Tommy Stewart, like I said, was unable to be here today. He asked me to read something into the record, and I'm happy to do that. Let me read that in, and we'll go from there. In Tom Stewart's words, as we previously entered into the records by a letter dated February 12, 2013, the North Fork lot owned by myself and my wife, Thomas H. and Barbara C. Stewart, benefits from an express recreational easement granted in the original deed from John Miller, and has been acknowledged by the Miller-Nichols Trust. To our knowledge, such express recreational easement is unique amongst the North Fork owners. We have informed the trust that we would be willing to release this express easement if and only if the terms of the proposed new recreational and access easements being negotiated with the other North Fork owners prove acceptable. We are hopeful that will be the case, but we yet have seen drafts of the actual easement documents, and until such time those easements are finalized and signed, it is our position that the conservation easement would be subject to the terms of our previously recorded express recreational easement. And let me clarify that only on the one lot that Tom is associated with does this express deeded recreational easement exist. With the other lot that is currently undeveloped, he has joined our group, and I'll be speaking for him with the next hat. So my second hat is representing the majority of the other residents on the North Fork. There are 14 lots on the North Fork. We've spoken about the one that Tom Stewart owns, the other one that a separate entity owns, of which Tom Stewart is a member. Bill and Suzanne Green are here today, as well as Ann Burrows are here today. They will be speaking for themselves if they decide to speak. Gideon and I have written authorization from all the rest of the owners, including myself, to speak for them today on the issues that you all have been dealing with here. Our neighborhood group remains generally supportive of the Nichols Family Trust in seeking rezoning and approval of a limited number of additional home sites in the valley. The primary reason for our support lies with the anticipated grant of a conservation easement to the county on the balance of the property. Those of us who live in the valley understand the importance of the conservation values and are anxious to see that area preserved. However, as you've heard here today, we feel that the board is being asked to provide a final land use action today, and that action may be a bit premature. While we have reached a conceptual level of agreement on the scope of issues with the trust, what we learned this week, in fact only in the last couple of days, we may be in fact a long way from final agreement. Only Monday night did we learn that the detailed agreements concerning those conceptual issues of access and use in the valley were not ready for our review and would not be ready prior to the meeting that we are attending today, when we were only told a couple of weeks ago that we could probably expect seeing those documents in advance of today's meeting. Further, we were informed that the access agreement alone was more than 15 pages long, and that would require additional on-the-ground survey work to complete. We certainly understand the necessity to do the survey work, and we support Allison's suggestion that survey work does need to be completed. But 15 pages of a complex legal document for an agreement that is designed to replace the one paragraph deeded access agreement that I'm currently hold and has served me for 24 years to gain access to my home? Please note that supposedly 15 pages long of this access agreement would make it as long as the conservation easement itself. Further, we were also informed that the recreational uses agreement is as well not ready for review, and it as well will be 15 pages long at least. It makes you wonder just how hard it is to legally describe walking, fishing, and canoeing. The point is, there is no access agreement today, and we don't know what those agreements might contain. But if the length of the agreement is any indication, it will be at least as complex as the conservation easement agreement. Plus, the canoeing and fishing agreement must be extremely complex, and it'll take us quite some time to wade through that if there are 15 pages of detail that are associated with walking, fishing, and canoeing. While I and the other residents of the valley are ready to bring up this issue to a reasonable and timely closure, it appears distinctly unfair to expect us to not be very concerned that today we simply do not have the facts in front of us to offer an opinion of our support or non-support for this application. All we want to do is to be able to drive to our homes, canoe on the lake, walk through the forest, and fish in the river as we have been doing for the past 40-plus years. We continue to hope that all this can and will be accomplished, and our working relationship with the trust remains as positive as it has been to date. However, without those documents in front of us, and without those documents to review, it has placed us in a very, very difficult position. With respect to the conservation easement and its importance, and the sequence in which that conservation easement should be reviewed, I have a number of questions, and some of those questions on the conservation easement may be appropriate for the Open Space Committee and the staff and others that will be looking at that document. But there are a couple of major issues that jump out of that document that have not been discussed so far in this room. This board, your staff, and all of the other referral agencies have all presented the case for understanding the importance of the water rights associated with this property. Each of those entities have stated that those storage rights declared for piscatorial, aesthetic, recreational, and fire protection purposes, and the reservoir in which those rights are stored, are critical to the conservation values of this property. In addition, those rights have been suggested that they would be able to provide fire protection for the new proposed activity envelopes and the inhabitants in the buildings therein. We read in the staff report that these water rights need to be protected and included in the CE, and we're pleased to hear that the applicant is ready to do so, and we understand their hesitancy on the one CFS that serves for irrigation on the activity envelope number 2. The problem is, and what we don't understand, is why does it appear that the dam and the facilities to maintain those water rights are excluded from the conservation easement by the trust in 6D? If they're that important, if the dam needs to stay there in order to maintain those rights, why shouldn't the dam, the road at the crest of the dam, and all the facilities associated with that be included in the conservation easement as well? Also, in another section of the CE, there is a suggestion that the trust will retain the right to build new structures and buildings in the conservation easement, yet outside the activity envelopes. And perhaps this is just a misstatement in the CE, but this seems to be an extremely important detail that should be discussed at this level and the land use, in the land use determination on this matter. Lastly, in the case of Tommy Stewart's request, we will also, as a neighborhood group, want to see additional language placed in the conservation easement that if and when, and we hope sooner rather than later, that we are able to reach agreement on these access and recreational uses with the trust, the county will be accepting the conservation easement subject to the neighbors' rights that have yet to be defined because we haven't been able to review what the trust is expecting of us. Again, we think asking the board today to vote approval on this application is just premature. The neighbors do not have specific access to their lots. A 15-page complex document regarding use of the property has not been made available for review, and the dam and the road and the crest of the dam and all the facilities necessary to maintain the water rights so critical to the conservation easement are currently excluded from that document. We want to be supportive, but lack the information today to offer you our unqualified support. Thank you for your time and attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to make any public comments?
I would like to, I'd defer to Gideon if he has any comments.
I'll say something at the end.
Could you just introduce yourself, please, for the record?
Yes, sir. My name is Bill Green, and Suzanne and I have owned our property on the North Fork since 1977. And having grown up in Colorado as a native of Colorado, I really appreciate the fact that we have a process like this. And Commissioner Newman, I appreciate your listening to me. I'm not the best speaker, but I'll try to get through this. First of all, on the county attorney comments, is it Ely? Am I pronouncing that right?
You are.
I feel like when he says that we can't let the majority hold up this process, I disagree for this reason respectfully. These are individual property rights, and we're only asking for really for an access agreement and a recreational agreement. But I think the county should be in the position of helping us protect those rights, not looking on us as an adversary. And we really don't operate up there with the majority. I think the Nichols Family Trust should have to acknowledge individual rights and not look upon us as just some majority that's getting in our way up there. We've bent over backwards. We've had great concerns about elk issues, wildlife issues, and we've sort of put those aside to compromise, and we've tried to deal with the NFT in a very fair manner, and yet try to protect our individual rights. As far as I'm concerned, my best years are gone up there. I'm interested in my grandkids. You know, they love to fish, they love to use that pond. In fact, it's the first question they usually ask, is when are we going to go up the pond? So that really sort of surprised me. As far as the other comment that sort of struck me was splitting the envelopes and making the envelopes separate from the conservation easement. Those were things, we attended the original PNC, and those things were solid as far as we were concerned. And even the open space officer agreed that that was the best way to regulate, to help make the CE work, was to have those in the conservation easement, because there are a lot of issues that come up, like public use, fencing, as far as how the elk are going to migrate, how they're going to be protected. And I think we're all up there. We're up there because we do enjoy the pristine nature of the valley. But so that sort of got my adrenaline pumping a little bit. I would like to go back to my original letter, and I promise not to take much time. What I'd originally meant to say is that I'd like to emphasize that my wife and I, Suzanne, are speaking on our own behalf, and Fred Smith wanted me to make that very clear, that we belong to the neighborhood group, but and we do support what's been accomplished, but our comments at this point represent only our opinions. First, we were definitely somewhat disappointed that the trust didn't have their recreation and their access agreements ready for us to review. I mean, like Fred said, they're 15-page documents, and we feel they deal with individual rights, and when those documents are longer than the whole conservation easement, it didn't seem appropriate. And it seems almost like we're being stalled a little bit, because even in my written response to the Board of County Commissioners, I was delayed in that because I only got the letter from them a day ahead of the deadline. And I was down in Phoenix, Arizona. But at any rate, so we didn't have that. In lieu of those documents promised, we did receive a revised draft of the conservation easement. And though I'm sure our attorney has assured us there will be many things to review in that draft in the future, I tried to focus in my letter on 7 revisions, omissions, and questions I had on my just skimming over that conservation easement draft. And one thing that I was hoping is that we would have time for public comment on that. And but just to go through the 7 points, we've already covered that the envelope be excluded from the CE, and for the reasons mentioned, I think they should be included. Another thing that we thought we had agreed upon through the first 2 meetings was that according to Suzanne Wolf's recommendations, there's a 2,500 square foot barn that they want to either now put on one or other of the envelopes or split it between the 2 envelopes. Our agreement was always, due to the visual impact, that would be split. There would be 1,250 square feet on either envelope to sort of cut down on the visual impact. Under prohibited uses, the multiple parties may hold interest as co-tenants and joint tenants. We're just curious if the board would try to let us know what that means. We don't understand if this is going to be a timeshare allowance or more public use or fractional type ownership. Under the revised deed of the conservation easement, Ms. Easley says that acknowledgement of recreational use dispute with the NFG is subject to a court of competent jurisdiction or a majority of the neighborhood group. And we just want to stress that we really don't have a majority rule up there. And we didn't want to, I wasn't sure if they were implying that they were threatening lawsuits against us. I wasn't sure what the nature of that comment was. And then going on, I'll get through this fairly quickly. On the conservation easement, as should have been revised to state as requested in Suzanne Wolf's memorandum of 12/11/12 prior to the P&Z meeting, that it says access, under access, nothing contained herein shall be construed as affording the public access to any portion of the property. And then it says, although the grantor may permit public access to the property on such conditions as it deems appropriate. And Suzanne Wolf went on to state, it is staff's understanding that no additional public access is intended by the CE, in which case it would seem appropriate to strike the although clause in the statement above. And I noticed in this revised draft, it's still the same. It's the old language. So I think that's sort of a loophole that we would like corrected. And then just finally, a couple other things under the topic of access to neighborhood group lots via the North Fork Spur and the North Fork Loops. The Nichols Family Trust was proposing 2 brand new easements to the loop, the North Fork Loop and the North Fork Spur. And we live on the North Fork Spur, and we have already in our deeds a deeded easement. And my wife wanted to just point out that so we didn't feel like that could be, that they could take our private property and put it in their conservation easement. That was the first point. The other point was that we don't have any, the Nichols Family Trust doesn't have any easement on our property, And so we would hope that when hired gun survey comes in, they could accommodate our driveway and move the road to the south if possible, because we can explain it to them if we could be up there when the surveyors come up. Because otherwise they'll cut part of our driveway off. And at any rate, this is a little detail that I hope that they would consider helping us with. And then the last thing that I'd like to point out is that the Nichols Family Trust, they need to acknowledge that our recreational and access agreements should be not only enjoyed by our group, the primary owners, but also they seem to refuse to put that our heirs, successors, assigns, guests, and personal representatives should be included in that. And I've got 5 boys that would like to enjoy those rights someday too, and a bunch of grandkids. And we would also like that those rights be able to be recorded in our deeds, and that the recreational easement rights should be contained in a separate document and be recorded prior to the CE. And the CE should be made subject and subordinate to all terms and conditions of the recreational use easement. The easement should expressly inure to the benefit of and be binding upon the parties, their successors, and assigns. The easement should contain language that it cannot be amended or modified without written consent of all parties, and legal descriptions of the trust property and the North Fork Neighborhood Group property should be included, such that any subsequent search of our title to our lots will reveal the easement. And I just appreciate, and I'm sorry I'm a little nervous, I'm not a great public speaker, but at any rate, I appreciate your taking the time to listen to us.
You're welcome, you did fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I clarify just a
Who are you,
second?
ma'am?
I'm Suzanne Green, and I'm his wife. And on the easement, on a lot of things, but that's one of my titles. I know Commissioner Richards last time recommended that the existing North Fork Loop and Spur grant a 30-foot easement based on the existing center line. Well, the center line, there's a problem with the center line in that this is a 10-foot road, not a 30-foot road. And what's on one side of the 10-foot road and on the other side is not always, it's not like this flat map here. I mean, there can be boulders and mountains over here, and this can all be flat. Plus the fact is the Nichols Family Trust does not have easement on 4 of the properties that we're discussing on. But there is easement that the residents on our spur have. And so I would suggest that easement, and the thing is whoever did the road there just said, well, that's where the easement's supposed to go, and we're just going to take it and go anywhere we want to on it. But right now, the easement does not go, the existing road doesn't go on our property, and the existing easement does not go on our property. But if you expand it to a 30-foot easement from the center line, it would go on our property. The problem with our property is that if you go onto our property, we have a knoll that goes up there, and we have a telephone service there. You're going to have to be moving people's telephone services. You're going to have to be moving telephone poles. You just can't state a place. It needs to be surveyed and take into account, and I know and I can't speak for any of the other properties, but I know that road goes close to septics, it goes close to garages, it goes close, so if you went from the center line, you would have to be into people's garages, into their septics and things. But, you know, so just to give something like that, I think it takes a little bit more thought, and to give that easement, and as long as that easement is given without taking any easement away, I think that could be done fairly quickly. I think the easements that we have are part of our negotiation with the Nickel Family Trust on the recreation easement too. So that's what I had to say.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to make a comment? Yes?
My name is Ann Burrows. I'm the property owner there in North Fork, and my home is the first one to the west of the dam. And what I wanted to, and I'm speaking solely on my behalf and not representing the group as a whole. And what I'd like to discuss is the envelope number 2. And I have a few photos that I'll pass around showing the existing cabin and how it's really hidden from view by the trees surrounding it. And so if you look to the west of the dam, that the left-hand side of building envelope 2 is out in the meadow. And so these are pictures, the first batch. You can barely see the cabin, and that is what, and those pictures are pretty much similar, so you can just pass it along and take one and pass it along. So what I am hoping is that all of the new structures would go in the area where the existing cabin is, because in my view it is not appropriate to have it out in the meadow. And here are shots of the meadow from the road, and it's there's not much depth to it, and it's completely exposed to anybody driving on the North Fork Road. And so I'm personally interested in because my property would look directly across the road at the new structure. So if all of the activity were to take place where the existing cabin is, it wouldn't disturb the meadow. It would be farther away from the calving area, which has been mapped by Perry Will. And the new structures would be in a forested area, which is what was requested by the North Fork Master Plan. The upper Frying Pan Master Plan. And in my opinion, it would benefit an owner of the, if the new structure were to be built on the site of the existing cabin, that property would have a lovely view across the way to the reservoir. So I don't know why somebody would want to build anything down in the meadow.
That's because they won't.
I think those were my main points. And I concur with Fred's comments. I thought, I agree with everything that he said. Really, as far as the group is concerned. One thing that I think he mentioned is and I'd like to reiterate the importance of the non-severability of the water rights from the conservation easement, because the Inland Reservoir is very important to the aesthetics of the area. And if it were severed, the rights were severed, it could be sold off down the road. We all know how important water rights are. And that reservoir dried up and became a mud flat, but it certainly did not enhance the conservation value of the property. Thank you.
If you need to switch it back in, I can make color copies if you want this back.
I can back at some point.
Gideon, now I know you'll be brief on a 15-page
Nice enough, Amy, by the way. So just a couple quick comments for the record. I'm Gideon Kaufman, and I'm representing Fred Smith. First of all, I think Fred's done a great job of organizing the majority of the neighbors. He speaks for 12. The people that aren't here, the other two neighbors were able to speak. But I think there is, close to consensus on this issue. I'm sympathetic to what Allison has to deal with in terms of drafting these documents. I realize legal documents can be long. I'm not as intimidated as 15 pages as maybe some other people are. But I do think it's important to allay the fears and concerns of what's in those documents. It would be nice if the neighbors had a chance to look at those before you take your final vote. And the reason I say that is that the neighbors have compromised a lot, as has the trust. I mean, it's been a very good working relationship. But there are a lot of details that still have to be worked out. In other words, the neighbors compromised to do 5 canoes instead of everyone doing canoe. You know, certain limitations. But in the document themselves, there's going to be specificity that either makes the agreement workable for the neighbors or not. And the reason I think that this is a different situation than other neighbors is it's not just that these neighbors are on the outside looking in. A lot of these neighbors contend that they have a prescriptive right after 40 years of use on this particular property. So your land use application today is affecting potentially those particular rights. And that's why I think it's in everyone's best interest to look at those documents. I don't think it's going to take a whole lot of time, but at least give the neighbors the opportunity to review them, make sure we're very close, and then my hope is we can all come in together and say, let's move forward and approve this. But right now, the neighbors are compromising. You know, there's access issues, there's recreational issues. Those are really tied together for the neighbors. And I don't think it's fair for them to have their last say in front of you without knowing if we've really reached agreement or not on those documents. So I want to commend the trust for having worked with us. I think we're very close. I think it's great that the documents are almost ready for us. And I think we don't have to have the survey work done. I think we can see the nuts and bolts of the documents and understand whether we really have agreement or not. So I would ask that you give us that opportunity, and maybe yourselves as well, to see what's in those documents before you finally vote on this, and then the neighbors really don't have a future opportunity to address you because it's already been discussed and they've already compromised on some of the other issues. So there are some very important things that the document's going to reveal to the neighbors, and we would just ask that you give us, whether it's 2 weeks or whatever time it is, to see those so that we can intelligently address to you what our concerns are, what our support is, which is what our ultimate goal is to everybody work together and come in front of you with a united front of approving this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to make any public comments on this issue? I will now close the public comment. Peter, bring back the board. I just have one quick question or comment to Gideon. You said that there's 14 landowners. You were here representing 12.
No.
No. Okay.
Okay. Fred's my client.
Fred's your client.
Fred has done a yeoman job of organizing everybody, but as an attorney, you can't really represent 14 diverse interests. So Fred has authorization to speak today for 12 of the 14. The other 2 are here speaking.
Okay. But Fred doesn't have the ability to sign for...
No.
So then it comes back to the question, you have to get 14 people together, not necessarily together in a room, but to agree on all the specifics. And that can always be a challenge. As we've heard today already, there's some differences in needs and wants. So with that, I'll bring it back to the board and start with Rachel, then Michael.
Well, I don't know if we might have been going to say the same thing or not, but, you know, from what I've heard today and looking through the documents, I just really can't find this to be ripe to take a vote for an approval at this time. I don't like the idea of county approval where one of the potential courses is that the neighbors who are asserting their property rights are going to have to go to court. And that, you know, that one of the defaults is, well, they'll either take this agreement as we draft it and hand it to them some point in the future, or they can go to court. And that to me would be us unfairly weighing into the leverage of those negotiations and discussions. You know, I tend to think it may or may not be important for the neighbors to see the surveys, but I would want to see the surveys so that we can, you know, make sure things like the county roads are sufficient for fire protection. And I apologize if my comment before was unclear, but I was talking about the easements that the applicant can give us, certainly not easements on to other people's properties that are not subject to this. In general, I think that the conservation easement should include the dam, road, reservoir, things like that, as Fred has pointed out, and it should be very clear as to what structures are allowed outside the activity envelopes, whether that's new pumping stations or irrigation equipment or things like that. We can make some allowances for different potentials, but we should be clear, especially with the kind of the greenhouse and the barn regulations that the county has separately approved and put in the land use code. But I really want to see some sort of actual agreement and have had the neighbors had the chance to see the agreement and not say, well, to the neighbors, if you want to validate your rights, you have to go to court because Pickens County's already taken this action. And, you know, this is all we're going to offer as an agreement. And I just really cannot see this as being complete. And then I think there probably is great value to the county in terms of maintaining the activity envelopes within the conservation easement as well. I just can't see the carve out the way that you were discussing, and I appreciate that issue, but I think it's going to be very important that what we see is what we get, and that, you know, the end of the day, what we felt we approved is what we were approving. So for me, it's just not right. I do appreciate the trust's efforts to say, you know, the reservoir rights will be tied to the land, and I can support the idea of allowing changes of location of where the irrigation waters would be applied, but I wouldn't want to see them severed from the land at the end of the day. It just, you know, the Colorado Water Trust had a great symposium a couple of years ago about conservation easements and water rights and how, you know, the industry has evolved, obviously, but in the early times, people were getting conservation easements and then finding out they had a barren 40 acres that wouldn't grow anything but sage and thistles because the water was stripped. And there really is not the value of the conservation easement, which is generating 7 TDRs. You know, there's something of value being given for that conservation easement. I think we need to see it to be encompassing and very exact. So that's kind of my impressions of it at this
Thank you.
point.
Michael?
I was going to ask the board if it would be okay if we had an executive session with our attorney.
We always honor those requests. I'd be happy to.
Okay. For just advice of attorney, we need a
Make a motion? Michael?
CRS.
You need an affirmative vote by the board and a reference to CRS section 24-6-4024B for the purposes of attorney-client communication regarding this particular application.
Yeah, I'd move that.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
You guys can stay here. We'll leave the room for a few minutes. That we started with, we still have to deal with. One is whether we want to look at encumbering the entire property with a conservation easement or exclude the building permits. The second is in regards to, again, encumbering the water rights with a conservation easement. And the third, of course, is to see a recreational and access agreement. So we haven't really spent a lot of time. Yet most of our conversation, public comments, were more specifically to the recreational and driveway access. But I want to see where we're at in terms of the conservation easement topics. We know what staff has recommended. We heard the applicants. Where's the board on that discussion? Michael?
Well, in terms of the water rights, they shouldn't be able to sever those water rights from the conservation. And so I'd like to see that specifically mentioned, that those water rights would stay with the property.
So are you saying that should be part of the conservation easement? Or?
Well, whatever means it takes to get those water rights to be permanently attached, essentially, to the property is what I'd like to see. So.
And the infrastructure necessary to maintain those rights, like the dam.
Yeah.
Rob?
And there was something brought up about the ability to change the use of the water rights within the property. So that's part of this discussion as well, whether it's used for an agricultural irrigation or for one of the activity envelopes. I think the applicant brought up something along those lines as a request to, I don't think they had an issue with maintaining the water rights on the property or connecting them 100%, but they wanted to potentially make
adjustments for irrigation.
adjustments for how exactly they're used. And I don't remember exactly how that would be worded or what they exactly were asking for, but it was brought up by the applicant.
John, did you?
That was the point I was going to make. I wanted to see if that was acceptable to the board to incorporate that flexibility in conservation easement.
Yeah, as long as that use conforms
Stays on
to
the
state law. I mean, so, you know, yeah.
And that was the 1 acre-foot right as opposed to the reservoir rights. So, yeah.
Okay.
So that can be done either under the conservation easement or another tool.
Okay.
Steve?
There is precedent for, in different conservation easements, for keeping the water in the conservation easement and keeping it with the property. I'd like to read a part from the Capitol Creek Ranch Conservation Easement from 2003, which you could have referred to instead of the Cold Mountain because it predated that. This section is about restrictions on water rights this is quoting from the conservation easement. The water rights may never, 1, be changed to or used for municipal, industrial, commercial, or any other new uses. 2, be changed for use other than on the ranch. 3, be sold, leased, encumbered separately from the ranch or otherwise legally separated from the ranch. Or 4, have their points of diversion or their type or place of use within the ranch changed, except after a written determination by grantee that such changes are consistent with the permitted uses and do not impair the conservation values of the ranch. So our water rights on the ranch are encumbered. They go with the land, but there is the possibility for changing them written right into the conservation easement, which gives protection to the applicant for, being able to use the water right for something different or using it on a different part of the land. So I actually have a couple copies of this and brought one for Allison to have. I have other comments too, George, about other aspects, but in terms of the conservation easement, I think it's essential that the dam and the reservoir be included in the conservation easement. Obviously, that's a central part of what the environment and ecosystem of the property is, and protecting those water rights and protecting physically the area where the water is, to me, is just goes along with the conservation easement. I couldn't see separating that land out at all. In terms of the activity envelopes being in or out of the conservation easement, the wording of the CDPUD clearly makes it sound like they could be kept out of the conservation easement, just like you pointed out. And I could go either way on that. I do note, however, that putting a conservation easement on a property is a very important step, and it shows the concern of the Nichols Family Trust for the land and wanting to do the best thing for it. It can take a long time to put all the pieces together to make a conservation easement and a land use plan what you want them to be, and my family is a testament to that. It took several years, as Suzanne was involved in that some. to put all the pieces together, it took a really long time and a lot of negotiation and figuring out, because we were the first ranch to do this, and that made it take longer than it does anybody else. But to do this process right, I don't want to rush into a decision that we would regret making the wrong decision. I think all the pieces should be in place. I would even rather see the wording of the conservation easement already approved before the land use application is approved, even if it took several more months to do that. I would prefer to have that wording also all worked out. To me, it's essential that the agreement between the homeowners and the Nichols Family Trust is in place and signed, just for the protection of both parties, because they both compromised both ways. And I cannot vote for it the way it is without having those different protections in place for the different parties involved. So I would urge the parties to take the time to do this right, and even if it takes a couple of extra months. I don't know what the sense of urgency is if the Nichols Family Trust wanted to do some construction this summer or something. But even if it takes all summer to get the whole thing right, I'd be more in favor of that than rushing into a decision right now.
Steve, just to clarify, it sounded like you wanted to ensure that the reservoir was under conservation easement, but you weren't as committed in terms of having the building envelopes as part of the conservation easement.
I would prefer that the building envelopes were part of it also. That's what I'm used to on our land. However, the CDPUD, the way it's worded, is ambiguous. It makes it sound like it's fine to have it a separate thing. Leaving the building envelopes out of the conservation easement could have some unintended consequences. In terms of things that might be bad for the conservation value of the rest of the land, like trash, for instance. On our conservation easement, we can't have inoperable vehicles stored outside. This one, the draft mentions the dumping, accumulation, storage, or burying of any kind of trash, etc., abandoned machinery, etc. So it could become a junkyard on those building parcels. I don't think that's the intention of the Nichols family, but if it's not in the conservation easement, it could become that.
Okay. Of course, this is a new code amendment, as has been discussed. The CDPUD came after, of course, your ranch went under conservation easement, so it's a little bit different. Other comments or thoughts on those two conservation points, so we can give some staff some direction, perhaps the applicant some direction?
Yeah, I'd like to see the lots within it. I think it's not unworkable, and I think there's other projects that certainly have done that. And again, the water I've already spoken on.
Okay. Rob?
If the applicant agrees with the type of language for the change of water uses that was written in the child's conservation easement, I'm okay with that, and I would like to see the reservoir and dam somehow included into the water right conservation easement. The activity envelopes, I think the language for the CUPUD is a little vague and does kind of talk about the spaces outside the activity envelopes. But I kind of like the compromise, again, that was brought by the applicant to include the language for acceptable uses as existent in our code today to be included. And I think that's the direction that they were talking about, saying like, Well, if there's a problem with what we're going to use the activity envelope for, and we think the code might change down the road, let's add that to this agreement that the space inside the activity envelope can only be used for the existing uses that are allowable within the code for the CUPUD.
Okay, so just clarify that a little bit.
Clarify it, but exclude it from the conservation easement.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with what Rob just described for the activity envelopes. In terms of the water use, although I appreciate Steve's input, I think, we should leave it up to the attorney to draft language that's current and the best possible language.
Sure.
So,
Okay, so it sounds like we definitely want to make sure that water rights are not severed in any way, but allow some flexibility for the irrigation. It sounds like we can come up with a way to address the building envelopes to ensure that their use is not going to be expanded beyond what is allowed. And then the last issue, which of course we heard a lot of public comments from, was the recreational and access. And of course, as the applicant remembers, and which was brought up by the comments, is that was one point we specifically asked for when we continued this last time, to come back and ensure that there was a document in place and it was solidified by all parties, at least attempt to, and we haven't seen that yet. So with that, I'm going to suggest that we table this until, give a month's time or 2 weeks, whatever you feel is appropriate, to ensure that that all the parties have the opportunity to see and work on that easement agreement. And Allison spoke to those three main principal points, and I don't think we need to go beyond those points in terms of other comments in terms of driveways or location of buildings. It really was specific in terms of recreational and driveway access, and to have the opportunity for the homeowners to look at that and come back to us so we have an opportunity to see that as well. And then I think we can move on with the decision. That would be my recommendation. Steve and Rachel?
I move that we continue the second reading of the Nichols Family Trust rezoning to CDPUD and the Nichols Family Trust CDPUD plan review, GMQS exemption, activity envelope review, until such time as those conditions are met.
Yeah, we need probably a
Fixed date month.
Yeah.
fixed date, so
June 12th would be our first regular in June. Because it just seems that 2 weeks to reach 14 owners is going to be a little too tight.
June 12th?
June 12th is our first regular.
So that gives everybody a month. That should be ample time. That agreeable?
Yes.
So continue to June 12th.
Yeah, that would be fine, 1 month.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's take a 10-minute break here.
Can I ask a question? Was the barn ever decided on? I mean, it was decided before one way, and then they asked the second way, so I didn't know if it was ever decided one way or the other.
It's going to be...
There's language in the resolution.
Language in the resolution that you can look at.
We're okay with either way, so if they want to split it, that's fine with us.
Conservation.
You can work with staff and...
We're okay with it either way.
Okay, our next land use public hearing item is the Inn of Aspen expansion of a non-conforming use structure. Mike Kramer will present.
Okay, thank you. Mike Kramer with Pickens County Planning Staff, and we have a request here to expand the Inn at Aspen located at 38750 Highway 82, right at the base of Buttermilk. And they would like to increase the height of the porte cochere at the front of the building, extend that height through to the Buttermilk side or the rear of the building, and then also do some site work. In addition to that request, what you have in your packet were actually two separate submittals that we merged together into one so we could do this under one hearing. You also have a request to increase the height just east of that porte cochere for an addition of an ADA elevator. So we have two submittals merged into one, and you have the packet in front of you. The applicant's Inn at Aspen Homeowners Association, and we have Eric Smith and Associates here to represent the HOA. In the staff memo, typically this is really a very simple review and would be conducted by staff, but given the fact that AR2 is the applicable zone district for this parcel and that multifamily is a prohibited use, this is considered a legal non-conforming use and has been there forever. It's been there since the 80s. So we classify this as a legal non-conforming use, and whenever an expansion of legal non-conforming use is to occur, it is decided upon by the Board of County Commissioners. That's what we're doing here today. So activity envelope site plan is the applicable review, and then also the expansion of the non-conforming use. And I won't go into too much detail with this activity envelope and site plan. There are no hazards on the site. The site plan is for minor site work that is going to occur on the back side or the Buttermilk side of the Inn at Aspen, landscaping, patio work, pool, spa. The one section that is of interest then would be the restoration or expansion of the non-conforming use, and that's the board's review and criteria for either approving or disapproving this type of application. And basically, we look at applicability of the master plan. The code asks us to look at any inconsistencies with land use policies. There are none. We find this in conformance with the 2012 AACP. Staff did put a paragraph in about the WAMP, or the Western Room Plan. That would also be an applicable master plan to review this under. However, the WAMP, Western Room Plan, is not yet adopted yet, so we don't have that for review. But in general, staff is recommending approval of this application. And in the packet, too, you have the applicant's submittals with renderings and elevations and things like that. They've also prepared a PowerPoint if the board would like to see it. Otherwise, you can direct the applicant as such then, George.
Okay, questions for Mike to begin with? Rachel? Then
What were the two applications that were merged? Why were they merged?
Well, when staff originally was meeting with the applicants, they had wanted to immediately do the ADA elevator addition, and they submitted an application for that specific request. And then later, they wanted to increase the height of the porte cochere to make it gabled and do some site work. And that was really kind of like a phase 2, if you will, of the project. They submitted that application a little bit later. So instead of doing two separate hearings for the two separate phase 1 and phase 2, staff just put them all into one and then presenting it to the board today. So that's the reason for the two applications merging into one.
Thank you.
who is up? Michael and then Steve?
So AR2, how long has it been zoned AR2?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure.
And you said this has been here since the 80s. It's been here much longer than that.
68, I think. 69. 69?
I think it was kind of minimized in
82.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was referring to.
Okay, so the structure has been there for a long time. Why haven't we changed the zoning to reflect what we actually have on the ground now?
Well, that's also a good question. And if we wanted to, we could. But right now, we don't have a multifamily zone district. If you remember the Chamonix proposal a number of months ago, that was under consideration and was going to come up for a second reading with the board. But as of today, we don't have a multifamily zone district for, in the land use code.
So what exactly then is the use? This is a condominium, but it's also rented out, isn't it?
Portions of it, I think, are, and we can ask the applicants that, but they are ownership condominiums, and under the land use code is considered multifamily.
So that's the determinant. Does the WAMP foresee any changes in zoning along that corridor?
As far as zoning changes, I'd have to go back to the draft and look to see. What the WAMP has done is it's segregated out specific nodes of development along the Western Maroon corridor, Airport, Buttermilk, Innet Aspen, the Pomegranate. And what the WAMP has done is taken and created site-specific or node-specific criteria for development. It's not yet adopted, but there are criteria for development in this Innet Aspen / Buttermilk node.
And what are those criteria for development that are contemplated in the WAMP?
Well, some of the criteria contemplated are reductions in height, landscaping criteria, lighting criteria.
Reductions in height?
Yeah.
Meaning reductions in allowable height?
Correct.
Okay. So they're talking about, the WAMP is contemplating a diminishment of profiles here?
That's correct, yeah. The WAMP is considering that.
And at Buttermilk also?
Well, the node is the Innet Aspen and Buttermilk node. It's kind of like a combination of the two areas. Obviously the Buttermilk ski area and then Innet Aspen. But the node has some site-specific criteria that is being looked at by the P&Z.
And is node now taking the place of zoning? We have node active, what's going on here?
Well, keep in mind, I'm a current planner. The long-range planning staff is handling the Western Maroon plan.
No, I'm just trying to, what my questions are getting at, that if we have this application in front of us, that we don't do something that's contrary to something contemplated in the future, or we contemplate in the future acknowledging that we have a multifamily unit there, and we've had it since 1982, or 1989, whatever, the 80s. So what's going on? So now we have a change suggested here. It may not be significant, but I don't know. So I'm just asking these questions to find out.
The nodes aren't zone districts per se. The nodes are, the Planning and Zoning Commission picked out specific areas that they wanted to have specific design guidelines for. The airport being a node, and knowing that the airport might be treated with different standards than other people along Highway 82. The Aspen Area Business Center will be a node that will have its own separate set of guidelines for. Base of Buttermilk Innet Aspen will be a node that will have a set of design guidelines. Pomegranate Aspen Country Inn will be a node, but it is not contemplated that existing uses that, for instance, this AR2 single-family zone, it's not contemplated that uses should go back to being a single-family use. These nodes are being designed to accommodate the kinds of uses that are there today. And I believe some of the implementation recommendations will include things like try to see if it makes sense to come up with a appropriate multifamily zone district. My guess for the reason this being here so long as a non-conforming use in a single-family zone is the previous boards of county commissioners found that very satisfactory way to deal with uses because it gave them the opportunity to review anything that happened. And that's probably why it hasn't changed today.
Steve? My questions also have to do with WAMP. If WAMP were, and I realize that we don't have to abide by it because it hasn't been adopted yet, but if WAMP were in effect, would this project as proposed be allowable? Because I know they've kept the height restriction below what is allowed now.
That's correct.
It looks like they're being conservative on the height thing, so it would be allowable in terms of the height under WAMP?
It would not. There is a consideration for a lower maximum height limit than what's allowed with current zoning today. And the application as it sits conforms with the AACP and the land use code. If the WAMP were in place and was adopted as is drafted today, this would not be able to happen as far as the increases in height.
The total, the max.
Based on the location or setback, you mean?
That's correct. Based on the location and the restrictions in the Innet Aspen and Buttermilk node.
Okay. It's yet to be determined whether that will be adopted.
Yeah, I realize that, yeah.
Yeah, we really can't.
It's not in effect, no.
We really can't speculate on the WAMP if and when and what the final result is. In fact, we approved the Mountain Rescue Building without considering the WAMP, because if that had been in place, that could have had an impact on that decision. So, and I think staff has mentioned that. Other questions for Mike? Rachel?
Does any usable floor area get created with the new roof elements, or are they strictly design elements?
They're strictly design. The only addition in floor area would be for the elevator.
Okay. And then, I'm kind of going through this, and you're comparing their proposal to existing allowed heights. You're not, and it seems to be lower in many circumstances, in the midpoint and things like that, than existing would allow. But have you compared their proposal to what would be in the WAMP? I mean, I understand what's just been discussed, that it's not applicable now, but I'm just kind of wondering how much variation is there, since this is lower than current existing.
Correct. Yeah, current zoning would allow, in the porte cochere element of the proposal, to actually go up to 33 feet in height. So this is, in zoning, today's zoning terms, 5 feet less than what's allowed. And as far as the WAMP, I have to admit, I can't remember what the proposed height limitation is. Do you remember, Lance?
28, I believe.
Yeah, and it's more in guidelines. It's going to, as the gentleman said, it's going to have to do, if it is adopted, the proposal is based on how far someone is from the highway. So heights could step back and could be higher the farther a structure was from Highway 82. And I can't give you the exact parameters of that.
But, I mean, in general, I like the design, and I think that it really enhances the building that still has a little bit of that Holiday Inn look to it at the front. Very boxy, and I think that that's good. I know we're not going to really be talking about the non-conformingness of this and should it stay that way or not at this time. If we do, I think that that's a really detailed discussion to have, because once it's no longer non-conforming, if it was zoned multifamily, how much floor area by right would each unit and property owner have? Should it be demolished and rebuilt? So you're really kind of changing, what you'd like it to grow into by changing the non-conforming use. And I'm not sure what we would like it to grow into if it were to change. I know there's been some discussion of that, but, I know it's awkward to live with a legal non-conforming use, but sometimes that's really the only way to deal with properties that were developed so long ago that are different from current aesthetics and plans. So I'm okay living with that. I don't have a problem with that. So I'll just leave it there.
So, if there are no more questions from Mike, the applicant has a PowerPoint. Would the board like to see a PowerPoint or just a presentation? And how long would the PowerPoint be?
5 minutes or less. I've just got a number of slides that might be helpful if you'd like.
Sure. PowerPoint, sure.
I know you've got a long afternoon, so I'm not trying to drag it out.
All right. And why don't you identify yourself for the record as well?
My name's Eric Smith with ESA Architects from Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And we've been working with Innet Aspen on this proposal really to do two separate things. One, to correct the ADA access with an elevator piece, and that elevator piece is being built right on the front of a secondary entrance right here on the building. And the reason that's being built out from the building, the original building was all precast post-tension concrete, so trying to put the elevator inside and cut through this post-tension concrete is difficult, so we located it just outside where one of those decks is located, and so that necessitated this increase in floor area. There's nothing that gets used from an occupancy standpoint other than to accommodate the elevator and the access to the elevator. The other area was the porte cochere in the center, which runs through the structure. That goes forward? This does. This is the elevator portion. There's actually a parapet behind this that's being taken off that is 24 foot 9 inches tall. The peak on this elevator tower is 24 even, so we've actually lowered that section about 9 inches, and then we've added this little roof element at the lower level just to protect the entry and provide access into the elevator inside on the building. This is an elevation before, and that elevator is going right in this location. You can see afterwards, you can hardly tell the difference because there's a tree there, but there's a tiny section of roof there, and I'll flip back again. That's before, that's after. So not much impact there at all. This next is in a little different location again. That elevator is going in that location. That's before, that's after. So you can see we took that flat piece of parapet off that sticks up in the air there and put this low sloped element in its place. So pretty insignificant. The porte cochere gets located in the center section. It goes through the building here, and then we're taking off or proposing to take off an existing awning in the back and redo this porte cochere roof. The location of the porte cochere stays the same in the front on the site. We're just changing the roof through the middle. Again, this is before. Here you can see that tall flat section. The top of that flat section is 24 foot 9. The peak that we're proposing is 28, and then it drops on down to about 18 at the edge. What we're trying to do is get the underside of the porte cochere lifted up to the extent that we can drive a larger vehicle, buses and so forth under. Right now, it's so low we can't get any big vehicles under there. So that's really the objective there. And what you can see is just before and after, and again, this is on the back side showing the proposed development and previous. It's a little difficult with these lights on, but...
George, can you hit that one light down for a second? Thanks.
That's a little bit easier. You can see the two low-sloped roofs that we're talking about. That's where the roof comes through from the porte cochere, and then that's the little section on the back of the restaurant area. So it doesn't get up into any of the view areas at all. It's pretty insignificant. This is just an architectural drawing showing what happens with this low slope. These are the existing parapets that are on the building. The existing parapet at the porte cochere comes through here like this. So portions of it are taken off, and then we actually get a little bit taller in the very center section, and then we're lifting this up so we can get the larger vehicles underneath. And this is an overall down below that just shows what happens with those two little bumps. So in terms of the overall mass, it's pretty insignificant to the structure. And this is on the back section. This is a continuation of that roof that comes through where the back entry is now, and then there's an existing green awning that sits in here that we're proposing to remove and come in with a fixed roof element. This shows the existing section of the parapet heights that are there now. That's really it. Thank you.
Questions?
I am a bus driver, so I'm curious about just the route a bus, especially the big coaches, would take to get in, or what do they do now, and then how will it be different?
Actually, we're proposing to modify the landscaping a little bit in the front so that they can make a turn a little bit earlier. Right now, you have to come up a little closer, and there's some parking right in front of the existing porte cochere. That would go away, so we create a larger turning radius for those vehicles in the front, and then we want the clearance height underneath to be at 14 feet. Sort of the over-road standard is 13.6, so we could get something under there as large as 13 or 13.6. That will allow us to take any of the emergency vehicles, fire trucks, any of the over-road buses underneath that porte cochere and give them maneuvering space to get under there.
So are they able to come straight off the highway and make the turn?
Yes, sir. They'll come off the highway where the existing access is from 82. They'll come in, and then they'll start a curve to the right and then turn back around. Since we have to unload on the passenger side, all those movements have to be counterclockwise. And so that will give them that turning radius so there'll be no backup movements at all for the buses.
Okay.
The elevator is for the purpose for ADA
yes.
compliance, and Are those second floor units, are they all set up for disabled?
Well, there are certain specific units that can be set up for disabled on either floor, but what has happened under the new Americans with Disability Act is they recognize a lot of different levels of disability. It may not be somebody in a wheelchair, it may be somebody with, a replaced knee, on crutches, on a walker, with a cane, anybody that may have a difficult time with stairs. So the idea is we want to have access on both floors for those people, as well as people just pulling luggage carts and everything else. We can't get luggage up to that second floor without hauling it up the stairs. So all the luggage carts that are unloaded at the front desk, particularly with the shuttles that come in, those have to be unloaded and all that baggage dragged up the stairs because there's no way to get the luggage up there. So it will serve not only the disability issues, but also just good access to the project.
Yeah, because I was just curious on some of those units, if the bathrooms are set up, if they're wider, if they've got safety bars, or if not, are you planning to do that?
Some do, and we are in the process of doing that currently.
Other questions? This is a public hearing. Anybody wishing to make a comment on this? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Read back to the board. Steve?
I'd like to point out, this is the first time I've come across my father's signature. And what they didn't do quite right in 1984, I think we're making it better now. I like the addition of the elevator. I think that's an essential part of any building like this these days. And I like the looks of the change of the roof line. It definitely makes it, more attractive building, and definitely makes it more usable for unloading people underneath there.
To accept a motion? I move to approve a resolution of the Board of County Commissioners of Pickens County, Colorado, granting approval for the Inn at Aspen activity envelope site plan expansion of a non-conforming use structure with significant changes.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all for your help.
Are you interested in your packet back?
Materials back.
We have several of them.
Do you want this back, Tom?
Yeah, why don't we take them for the...
You never know if you can use those site plans or
Yeah.
something.
We could definitely use the,
Here you go.
let's see.
At least you guys don't have to get agreements with all your neighbors.
You just have to hear about it from other people.
I just went back to pick something, I'm going back and look at the neighbors. I thought it was on the shop today, but I didn't see anything.
There you go.
We're gonna improve it, we're gonna make it look better, and we're excited about it. So who's your father?
Robert Child is the...
Oh, yeah, the HOA had to vote
He
for it.
signed it as the vice chairman, signed the resolution in 1984.
Oh, okay.
He was county
From the
commissioner.
county side, I see.
Yeah, from about 1980 until about 1995.
Okay. So there's a lot of history in the project. Good to see you. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, we're going to go on to our board open discussion. John?
I don't have anything new for you today.
Okay, anybody else have anything on open discussion? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you, grassroots.
Very important.
You need it.